Hey guys, hey Will Keller, Shine. Welcome back, Mandatory Myocarditis. I love your name. But yeah, I actually was doing an interview. So that's part of the reason why I'm a little late today, and by a little, probably a lot, but but we're gonna get started here very shortly. Wow, Derek, you just put him on the spot. Logan's fault. Logan is great, okay? Logan is great. So he made me a little late, like 2 hours, 3 hours late. Listen. It is what it is. Thank you, Shine. You had all these ideas in my head, but no proper terminology. Oh yeah, totally. That's exactly how I felt. Exactly just like you, Shine. I mean, you know, we start thinking about these ideas of freedom and we don't know how to articulate it, but then once we actually start thinking about it and we start hearing other perspectives and perspectives that have been here for like ever, we totally gain a greater sense of how to word things, for sure. I'm gonna call Aaron real quick and maybe get the stream on the One Great Work Network as well, to reach more people. And I'm gonna start it up right away after that. Okay, never mind. He's not picking up his phone. Anyways, we're gonna get started. Ah, shoot, my camera. My camera is off. Oh my. There it is. Whoa, amazing. How's it going? Isn't it crazy? So if you actually look at my stream, like not even 2 days ago, I had like redness all over here, right? Because of the allergic reaction that I had. And it's like almost gone, basically. I'm just left with this like small little thing, and because I was using cocoa butter, you know, just saying, it works. But also just in general, give it time, your body will heal itself in every regard. Let me know if Aaron can't. I can do it. Yeah, I can't actually get in touch with Aaron at all. His phone isn't picking up, so I forgot that. Will, you can do that too. Jeez, man. Yeah, you can put in the network if you'd like, man. I'd appreciate it. Totally. You can do that before I turn on all the interviews. And today, we have a lot of really cool interviews. And speaking of interviews, Dana Martin is one of these people. Dana has been everywhere. She's been interviewed everywhere. I mean, literally. She has been on TV, every single talk show host. I mean, it's amazing, right? And You go to her YouTube channel, she's got like a whole compilation of like appearances. It's like, oh my goodness, right? A lot of people know about her work because she specializes with unschooling and what she calls radical unschooling. A lot of people have different terms they use for this, but generally speaking, it's getting out of the school system. So you can call it homeschooling as well, or reschooling, or whatever. But generally speaking, unschooling means you're getting yourself out of it. She perfectly describes what it means, and really goes into detail as to why it's important, what can parents do nowadays. And I ask her all the challenging questions under the sun, you know, because obviously she's very experienced with a lot of this, with this topic. And I know Will Keller did a great presentation about parenting. Connie also did a great one about parenting. You know, of course, we have several speakers talking about this issue. David Rodriguez as well. Fantastic interviews. You guys are some of my favorites as well, even though it's about parenting. You know, I mean, I have to know this for my future. You guys have to know this for your children, grandchildren, or what have you. Very important knowledge. Of course, then we have today as well Graham Wright. And Graham Wright is somebody who I shared a lot of his animations with you guys. Like, you know those animations, the one that I showed before, the Philosophy of Liberty, where it goes over like, oh, here's this person, this is what constitutes their property, and this is what constitutes ownership. And then there was another animation where an alien came down to Earth and he was asking questions, and he was like, what is government? And the guy's like, I mean, it's the guy who controls everything. And the alien's like, everything? You know, it's such a good animation. So Graham Wright is the guy who technically did all these animations. And remember, he's also the guy who said, yeah, the animations are a lot of work, and I don't know if I'm going to do them again. But it helped his channel a ton. The guy is great, very knowledgeable, and so much. So in that interview, we talk about a free world and how it would operate better than the world we have now. Very, very important knowledge, because a lot of people think that you can't operate things in a free world. Like, geez, what would we do without the decentralized monopoly on violence? What would we do? You know, people would just have barely any thousands of solutions. It's just not enough. I mean, there's not what are we supposed to do? So anyways, I'm going to share the link with the live stream to everybody. I did already share it across different channels. You guys can feel free to share the live stream. I'd appreciate it. Get the word out to people. Of course, in general, to share the summit, there's been a lot of people signing up on the summit lately, and I think that's fantastic to see. I don't know who's been sharing it around, but it's doing its own work at this point. You know, I was pumping it out for two months straight, and it was getting out there. Will Keller and Awaken Your Mind, you guys, I appreciate you so much, because you reposted the trailers on your own channels. You helped share the word, and now it's doing its own work. I think people are sharing it, and it's getting around the block, and it's growing. It's growing very quickly overnight. I mean, you're talking upwards of 100 people just signing up at any given moment. I mean, that's over one night. That's incredible. So thank you guys for sharing it. And you know, I don't like to talk much about numbers because it's not a numbers game to me, but it is about impact. And I like the ideas. I like sharing those ideas. Clearly, there's a lot of people in independent media who don't have these ideas, so we need to continue getting it out there. The quality of the summit earned it also? Yeah, probably. I mean, hopefully, right? So my goal as the host is to try to make it pretty high quality, at least enough for the information, right? The information is what really matters above all. And, you know, somebody might have a certain way of presenting something, but you can choose who you want to listen to at any certain day. I shared it to the funnel crowd. That's awesome here. Yeah. I don't like to talk much about, you know, the successes, but I want to let you guys know, I mean, thank you for sharing. It is definitely paying off for getting the message out there. So thank you so much. I don't know, I don't even have to thank you, because frankly, I mean, although my channel is going to benefit from it to some extent, you know, in my work and everybody's works, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody, and that's the way we got to look at it, because the next project as well is going to include everybody, and by everybody I mean everybody. You know, all these thousands of people who are signing up, watching it now, I mean, they can absolutely, each one of them, contribute to the next project. That's it. You know, if you care about freedom, you can contribute to the next project. So it's just that simple. And I shared with you guys, you people in the live stream, a little sneak peek of what that is, and I linked it to you guys before. I'll link it one more time for you people who are curious about the next project. There it is in the chat. Actually, that's a bad link. Let me give you one where you can click it. And of course, we're gonna have a better URL than that, but that's gonna be the temporary URL for now. Keep in mind, very early stage, but you can at least send in articles right now, and I'll have it on the record. I'll keep a contribution of how much you're sending in articles, and let this be your independent media. You know, if you care about these ideas and you want to do something, you don't have to write more than like 100 words. You don't have to, make a beautiful art piece, but you could. And you can build your way there through just small acts of change. Let myself help you in this process. I'm very open to helping people with, in negotiating with others, bringing the message out there. Yeah, it's about making truth, freedom, higher consciousness popular. Yeah, for the most part, it already is popular in the world, but they don't apply it to slavery. I mean, they don't want to deal with some of these heavy topics that we're really breaking down to the point where it doesn't become heavy anymore. And that's the goal of the paper, is to give some light of some faith to the human populace at this current moment, and therefore, yes, their consciousness is going to increase with more education, with their faith and their greater, wow, here's an actual independent media who is talking about everything and is not limited on news. But it's more than that, right? It's going to be people who are doing it because they care, not because they're trying to make money. And it's not like we have an agenda. The agenda is freedom, and freedom has no agenda. It's every agenda. Great idea. I'm going to write something, or at least try. And that's the thing, right? I can write a whole article about agendas, just like I just said. And every day you're going to notice things, you're going to observe things in your world. You can write about it. Just write down your thoughts. Get a journal, write down your thoughts, and guarantee you over time, you might want to expand upon those thoughts, or you might find yourself expanding upon those thoughts. And that can easily turn into an article. And I'm going to add something to the site as well. Oh, nice. We got our first bot in the chat. That's awesome. And there it is. Classic bot. Love it. Thank you, Crystal, for helping me on the YouTube end, because I don't see it. I tried banning it on my end too, but we've got a classic bot entering the chat. Love it. But yeah, so there's a lot of plans to come, and I hope you guys stay tuned for that. There's going to be a lot of configuration needed, but I'm going to put all my focus into that once I'm done with these book projects that I'm doing currently and other things. Derek, who's also in the chat, Awaken Your Mind, we're working on another project that is going to come into the future as well. Right now, as we speak, he's literally typing in Discord. I can see him typing. He's probably laughing because I said that. I just registered for the now we stop typing. Come on, Derek, you had to say something. I know you did. I just registered for the pre-release. Woo, the site looks amazing. Good job. Yeah, for the newspaper. I mean, the newspaper site is totally new, but yeah, if you want to compliment it, thank you. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna get started here. I'm going to start playing some of the interviews. Like I said, we have Dana Martin, and then we have Graham Wright. Not sure if we're going to play George at the end there, because we go into a whole bunch of things. But it's a pretty chaotic, energetic interview. I'm not sure if I want to feature it, because I also want to feature some of the featured videos today. So we'll just see how things play out. And I thank you guys for hanging in there. We're gonna watch Dana Martin. So if you guys haven't seen her, don't know who she is and all her great work, I mean, she wrote a whole book. You're gonna find out right now. If you hear barking in the background, it's because I have my window open. Anyways, let's get started.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angela. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, Dana Martin. She is inspiring others for over a decade by sharing her experience through natural birth, attachment, and peaceful parenting and radical unschooling. She's an activist, educator, and sought-after public speaker. Dana has proudly advocated for radical unschooling through the media for the last decade. This has allowed thousands of other parents to learn about unschooling and to proudly live their lives without fear. The movement of unschooling is growing tremendously thanks to her bravery and unrelenting drive to share unschooling with the world. Her choice to live out loud is one with powerful inspiration that is changing the world and offering more respect, peace, and freedom to families worldwide. She has been featured on many talk show hosts and many news programs, and she is also an author. So very amazing, and very glad to have you here with us. And I've had other speakers and other people I've talked to who've mentioned your works, and I'm very glad that you're also providing with the audience some of your works as well, like your own book, Radical Unschooling, A Revolution Has Begun. You also have a whole website with a bunch more resources for anybody who's interested. That's danamartin.com, DaynaMartin.com. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be talking about ending childhood indoctrination. Thank you. Where do we start with this? I mean, why is it important to look at childhood and how we've become indoctrinated? How have we?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Corey. It's an honor to be here, to be part of this. So we can end childhood indoctrination from the point of birth, when it begins. And so my work is based on childhood, but it begins with birth and freedom with birth, and the medicalized management and control and the business of birth is kind of where everything starts. So for me, I learned about this. This wasn't something that I set out to do before I had kids, to live in freedom and to even be aware of the authoritarian paradigm in general, but through parenting my children, and I have 4 kids. My oldest is Devin, he's 23. I have a 20-year-old daughter, a 17-year-old daughter, and a 14-year-old son. So 2 boys and 2 girls who have been raised this way from day one. And yeah, I'm really happy to be speaking about it, but we end it from the beginning by not stepping into that dependence on authorities. But it takes a lot of undoing and deconditioning to be able to get there, where you can trust yourself and trust your children. So that's what I'm hoping I can support people with today and in the future.
Yeah, sort of like relying on the authorities, like you said, dependence is probably where the indoctrination comes in. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, this is this authority, this is my teacher, I have to take their word, or this is this textbook, and it's telling me the truth. Well, is it really? And a lot of parents today are really questioning things. I talk to parents a lot. They're going to school board meetings, they're mad at the schools, they want to change things, but maybe the solution is not changing the current systems. Do you think it's changing the current systems, or do you think it's getting out of those old systems and moving into something new?
Oh, definitely getting out. It's well-intentioned to want to change the system, but they never will. Any more than they'll change the medicalized version of birth when you go into a hospital. If you choose school for your child, you're choosing indoctrination. There's no doubt about it. Even with private schools, it's very much like that. But yeah, it's just stepping out of that whole dynamic, that whole paradigm, and going in a different direction, because all the focus and energy on changing something that's very set on being that way is really just a waste of time, and it's taking from your family.
Yeah. And from talking with a lot of other people, like I've told you, and like I mentioned before, it's becoming more obvious to me, like there are alternative routes that people can take, and they don't just have to go through this one system that seems to be failing so many people. It's not even helping a lot of people at the end of the day. So what is unschooling, this concept that you're introducing to our audience here? Could you sort of define this concept for us?
Sure. So unschooling is a philosophy based in trusting children with their education and their learning, but there's a lot more pieces to it. So unschooling is a method of homeschooling. Most people who choose to homeschool, they do what schools do oftentimes, and they'll just buy a curriculum and they'll do what schools do at home. And it might be a different location, it's in your home, but it's the ideas behind it, and forced learning that needs to take place is damaging. So I think most people, they might get a little afraid and they want to hold on to the edge of the pool. So they get a curriculum. And it's really scary to let go of that edge and swim right into the middle. But I'll tell you, it's much more natural. It's much more joyful. So unschooling is based in facilitating children's learning based on what they love doing in whatever way they like to learn it. So it's a perfectly individualized education, but it does take some undoing of thinking things in schooly terms. So deschooling is a process that needs to happen. But more and more unschoolers are, more and more people are coming to unschooling. So it used to be about 1% of homeschoolers were unschoolers, and now it's up to about 10% and growing. So it is very trust-based, like I said, but it's hard for people to let go when they first step into homeschooling.
Yeah. And so does this kind of tie into the reason why you call it radical unschooling, or is that like a more saying like, I'm totally leaving the system, I'm totally done with what that authority is, what that indoctrination center is? What makes it radical?
Ooh. So radical unschooling is taking the same trust you have for your child's education and letting go of the paradigm of authority and stepping into a partnership-based paradigm. It's extending that trust to every area of your child's life, from giving them freedom with the foods they want to eat and bedtimes and hygiene and all the things that are really difficult for
Wow.
parents to let go of. So radical unschooling is shifting completely in a partnership-based paradigm. And it doesn't involve any punitive punishments. So my kids have been raised without ever being punished. They've never been grounded. They've never had things taken away from them as a means of punishment. They've lived like this from the beginning. So radical unschooling is extending the trust of education into every area of your child's life. So, I mean, to me, unschooling is a whole life philosophy. It's not just an educational one. So that's basically, the indoctrination is not just from our school experience, it's from our parenting experience, and letting go of the idea of behavior modification and living life as though school doesn't exist. Instead, we focus on living our lives together joyfully and learning through things that we're interested in. And yeah, so there's undoing, deschooling that has to take place with the educational side, but then also the healing that parents need to go through from their own upbringing is all part of that as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the revolution that you say is in that movement, like you said, that shift, that dynamic from here's a bunch of people who were once in that system, and now here's a bunch of parents who are out of that system. And you're seeing success already. You're seeing that people are living more joyfully. So, I mean, you see it with your own eyes, you're saying.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, the reason I even started was because it changed my life so much. I didn't know that parenting could be joyful, and I didn't know that kids could thrive like mine did by living this life. I trusted in it and I believed in it. And I had people that came before me that I learned from. Like John Taylor Gatto and I were really close, and he encouraged me to write my first book. And so he was like someone who really encouraged me and gave me a lot of information and support. And so I trusted the people that came before me, and I kept going, listening to my instinct. And yeah, I just learned a lot that I want to share with people, because I think parenting is supposed to be joyful.
Yeah. So
And, yeah.
I have two questions about this that might come to mind for people who are watching. Like, what about social life? Like, what would you do then, like, when it comes to getting kids to know other kids that are out there?
Yeah, well, it depends on who they are and if they want to be around other kids.
Hmm.
You know, we think we know better, and we have to put kids in these situations in order for them to learn to be social, but it's not true. All of my kids had different social needs. And so when they would voice to me that they wanted to be around other kids, I needed to facilitate that. So I did a lot of different things. I organized meetups, I hosted different co-ops, different fun things to do. And eventually I started hosting conferences where we'd invite hundreds, if not thousands of people to come hang out with us for a week. So
Wow.
it takes a lot of effort. It's not for the lazy parent, but not
Yeah.
all children have the same social needs, and you never need to force them in situations that they don't want to be in.
Well, wouldn't it be probably harder for the parent who's already in that system and they are not used to this unschooling? They have to like get there somehow. Is there a transition how they get from point A to point B?
Yeah, I mean, just like we've all gone on. If you're interested in learning about it, you'll learn it, and you'll want to do nothing but learn about it. That's how true learning works, and that's the basis of unschooling itself, is that humans learn best when they're internally motivated. So I find that although there is a lot that people need to research and understand, it's a pleasurable journey to learning about it. It's not forced. And so forced learning is not learning. And that's what most of us kind of connect learning to be. So the journey is different for everyone, depending upon what kind of support they need.
Okay. Now, I think another question that would come to mind for people would be like technology and social media. Does that influence kids today? I mean, because a lot of kids would like really want to be on technology and playing video games all day. So we want to respect what they want to do, but at the same time, we may know better and say, well, they shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it influences them as much as it does us. And so we've educated ourselves, we're learning about it, and we need to communicate these things with our kids, and we always have. I've always done so. So when kids are living in a partnership-based paradigm with you, and you're not limiting and controlling things, they have a really natural relationship with you where they believe what you're saying. It's amazing. They don't think that you're trying to control them or take away something. So you become a really positive influence in their lives. And they believe me when I talk to them about things. And we watch all different, alternative media together. We discuss the dangers, and they're with me. Half of them are adults now, so they're not here all the time, obviously. One's living on his own, but my kids are with me when they're on social media, especially when they're younger. We talk about it. We talk about crazy things. We support them through education. So they need to be informed. If you tell a child you're not allowed to use that, it's bad, and you're not by their side to navigate it, it's really dangerous. It really is. So it's a lot of presence.
So like from what you've said so far, sort of like as a health coach, I sort of get that feeling like you're there as a coach and as a guide to really help that individual. Just really they have the answers within themselves, or they know what to do, and you're just sort of bringing that out of them. It's like, oh, I know maybe I shouldn't be playing video games, but and then you are there to say, well, maybe it is a good idea to not play video games, and here's the solution, right? Like you're not saying you have to get off of video games, but you're just introducing new things, like introducing new foods to get rid of like bad foods, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a life more exciting than the only option being gaming. I think that's important. And sometimes in the winter in New Hampshire, before we moved to Miami, there was times where it was like, okay, there's not much to do. I need to go. I need to step up my game so I can offer a lot of other things, because there's nothing wrong with gaming and there's nothing wrong with technology whatsoever. But we need to offer our kids a lot of different resources based on what they love. So when Devin, my oldest, when he was about 14, the game Minecraft came out. It was when it first came out. Some unschoolers were playing the beta version of the game. And so they had these whole group of, I think, 14 teens that were beta testers for Minecraft. And about half of them were unschoolers. They found the bugs in the game. We had no clue what it was going to become. Now, prior to Minecraft playing this, my son Devin was into like everything completely like nature-based. He was building survival shelters, and he was studying to be a blacksmith, and he was making knives and swords. And of course, that makes you feel like a proud parent when your kid's into all those kind of things. You're like, yeah, I'm doing it right. They're going to make it. But then gaming starts for some kids, and you might have some fear surrounding it. But I never did. I trusted him and facilitated it as much as I did with everything else. And I didn't value blacksmithing more than what he was doing with Minecraft. Now that sounds crazy, but it's true. Yeah. And so when he was playing, he would show me, all the things he was building. It was a really incredible experience in his life. And I would bring him food up, and I would facilitate his interest with a lot of other options. So I subscribed to gaming magazines for him. I found out that the first ever Minecon was coming to Las Vegas, and so we bought tickets. I wanted him to meet Notch, the creator of the game, and ask him questions. We facilitated so many things. We made Minecraft cakes, and we started meetups for people, and you name it. Although unschoolers don't break life down into subjects like schools do, and that's an important thing to talk about, the brainwashing with a compartmentalized aspect. The way that I facilitated his interest did touch on everything. I got Minecraft books when they started coming out, and it was just an amazing nucleus for a while of so much more learning that spun off of that. So that's just a little story about gaming in our lives.
No, I think that's beautiful, because it's like, we can talk all day about the school system and how it's failing people, but you're showing right now the beauties of how unschooling works. I mean, that I think is enough evidence to show it's like people can make their own minds. Do they want to be in this system of conform, stay in line, or this system where you have a lot more freedom, where you're supporting the individual? I remember, when I was in school, I had to read all these books I didn't want to read, all these subjects I didn't want to learn. And you're right. When I played video games too, I learned things. I actually was learning, and that's a game, but the game was actually like very mental. And I think it also depends on the different types of games. And like you said, really just the support structure. Because we're intelligent beings, are we not? We are supposed to use that intelligence that we have, or give way to that.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's no doubt that anything in moderation is okay. And sometimes even if I'm doing too many interviews or I have a lot of classes, my legs hurt. Technology can hurt me too, even though I'm doing something good, so I get up and stretch, or I'll need to go do something else. But just talking to our kids about it, see, the problems come to be in the unhealthy use of it when parents limit or control it, because limiting anything causes an unnatural relationship with whatever is being limited or controlled. So all humans' innate desire for freedom will override everything. And so when you're telling a child this is bad and you can only have an hour of it, it causes an unnatural relationship with it. They want to do nothing but have their freedom, which is the first desire. And a warped relationship starts with anything being limited or controlled. And we want to get nothing but that, nothing but that. I'm sure you could look back, Corey, too, on times in your life where you were limited or controlled and you overused or overdid or got out of balance with your own personal desires. So moderation happens, but only with freedom. And it's not through letting go just physically with limits. Because if a parent is like, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to let go of limits, if they still emotionally have fears about it, kids know it. And that's not true freedom. So this is part of the work we need to do. We need to be with them. I mean, my kids were so into Minecraft for a time in their lives when they were younger that I was like, I want to be with them. I'm going to learn how to play. And I did. They taught me how to play. I even started a Minecraft YouTube channel where I would talk about unschooling. And it was kind of dorky, according to my kids, but we'd play together and build together. And we were immersed in something that they did learn a lot from. None of them play anymore. But that was a time in my life that was really special for me and my kids. But it's only through freedom that someone can find moderation and giving information. My son Orion, he was probably the biggest gamer out of all four of my kids. And I would remind him, why don't you get up and stretch your legs, honey? How do they feel? Move your ankles around, get up and move around. Why don't we go outside barefoot and do some grounding? And he came to me once, this is interesting. And he's like, Mom, I just learned on a YouTube video that there's something called blue light. There's light that can really hurt my eyes through technology. And he said, I want to order these glasses. I think he was maybe 11 or 12. And I didn't even know about that. Now we know about these kind of glasses now, but I'm like, wow. He's like, I don't want my eyes to get hurt. So with freedom and information and support, no humans want to hurt themselves. It's only when we say what you're interested in is bad for you and you can't use it. Only an hour, that's it. My son did a workshop with me, my son Devin, and he was explaining to all these parents, an hour's not long enough in these kind of games. You're just getting started building something. Of course, kids are freaking out. When you give them an hour, you need to just trust them and, have other things to do. So this is a big topic to me that, oh my gosh, I talk more about technology than anything I think in my work right now.
Yeah, but I like how you're not just making it out to be like the devil, because it really is just a tool. Like anything,
Yes.
it depends on how humans use it. I definitely used it for beneficial reasons, to meet people and all sorts of things I never expected before. I never even expected to get to where I am now to do this interview with you. Nonetheless, meet all the other people that's on this great event, the summit. I mean, it's incredible. What I started with was just researching ingredients, and my parents didn't tell me to do that. Nobody really told me to do that. I just got curious, and at my fingertips, with the freedom that was provided to me, I got the information that I wanted to seek out, and that information led me down more information and more information, more information. And then soon, because my parents were just so connected, we're very connected as a family, which is very rare to a lot of other families I see out there. I still live with my parents, by the way. I have no shame in saying that. It depends on the world condition and everything, but like we're very close. And so that support system, even if like they did not know like a lot of things that I know now, right? And sort of just by being with each other and them supporting me, our ideas just bounced off of each other, you know, and I would share with them what I learned, and I would always talk to them. Even after I went to the public schools, I would talk to my parents, and that would help a lot. And then I became cyber schooled, where I got to see a whole different perspective. I don't think that's going to be in the right direction moving forward, because cyber school is going to become more like public school, in my view. But when I was in it, it was very new. It was beginning. You know, you only had like 1 day of school a week or 3 days a week. You can decide your schedule, decide all your classes. But what you're talking about with unschooling is, in my view, the way it really should be, you know, where the parents are the teachers. I mean, because it's your kid. It's literally your kid. Like, wouldn't you want to be with your kid as much as possible? A lot of parents will say, like, they don't have time. They're always working. What do you say to those parents?
Yeah, I mean, and I think most parents would want to be with their kids if they could step out of an authoritarian paradigm, because the way that most parents are told to parent is based on behavior modification. And it very rarely focuses on the child's needs. And you're kind of in a situation where you're constantly trying to control and getting everybody to bed on time and making sure dinner's on the table at 7. And you're so controlled by external forces, and you don't even realize it, that parenting is pretty miserable in the authoritarian paradigm. It is. And so the idea that a parent has to not only continue that, but then do everything with schooling, you know, education as well. Most parents are like, no way, I could never do that. And how do you do it? They always ask me, like, you're so brave. And I'm like, no, you're brave, actually, to even be, I don't know if the word's brave, but it's definitely not, because when you step out of the authoritarian paradigm and everybody is pursuing their passions all day, doing what they love, you know, it's a really joyful life. It's not like it is for most people. So what you're sharing about with your parents and the way that you guys have discussions, that's exactly how unschoolers learn. So you sit down and you're talking about different topics. Something comes up, and you know, our culture, we discuss it. We have so many different discussions. We could go on and on for hours. I mean, we just sit in the living room without the TV on, like some nights from 8 at night, hanging out until midnight, and we're still talking. Sometimes we'll watch a show, but that's not like the focus of our lives, to decompress from all the crap we don't want to be living.
Yeah.
You
See,
know?
my parents, they look at their childhoods too, and they saw they didn't have much technology, so they would play board games and card games and talk with each other late nights like that. So they just sort of brought that with them. And I feel like bringing things along the generations would also be quite important, in my view. And it's unfortunate to see that, you know, the elder generation, they're getting, you know, oh, I can't go here, I have to go to a retirement home. And I don't know how much wisdom they're passing to the next generation, but I think it's necessary that, you know, we keep the elderly also just as healthy as the young.
Definitely. Most cultures, they live multi-generational.
Yeah.
My husband, we've been married for a year in November. He's from India, and everybody there lives with their parents until they go and get married. In their 20s and their 30s, they're always together. And even then, you even stay together sometimes, because it's just, for one, it's more beneficial. You can live more with more when you're all sharing expenses. But you have to really be getting along with your parents for that to happen. You know, if you're living in an authoritarian paradigm and raising kids in a way where you're being very mean to them and controlling them, and they have resentment for you, they probably, you know, they probably will put you in a nursing home when you're old, because you put them in school against their will and you treated them like authoritarianly. So it's like, I feel like kindness begets kindness and respect begets respect. And my dream is to live multi-generational. I've been asking my husband's parents, like, move over with us. And my parents might be moving here. They're from England.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot to offer one another through our shared experiences and, you know, the way life was for them.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just fulfilling the destiny of humankind. I see it. I mean, what we're doing, right, when I'm talking about the ending of slavery, I mean, this is a process that takes many, many years. I mean, it took several thousands of years just to end chattel slavery, and I'm saying there's other forms that exist. I mean, this is a process, but I think the goal is to set up those communities like the Amish or the Mennonites and all these other groups around the world that already are together. They're out of the system. They're not doing a lot of the things that other people are doing, and they're with their families all the time. They have a lot of these support systems, and we don't hear about them because they are in their own system. You know, they don't need our system. and they're doing successful. They're doing great. So,
Mhm.
and of course we can criticize them for this and that, but we can also admire them for many things that we come to see. So you mentioned like you would sit down with like some of your kids and you would look at like independent media, and you would look at like alternative news and stuff. I feel like that can sometimes get a little complicated too, right? Because where you're getting your sources from, even in independent media, some of it might be very fear-based. Like, oh, there's this thing happening. Oh, this is happening. Look at this conspiracy. Look at that. There's rabbit holes. And do you feel like that can sometimes cause some problems, or are there particular sources that you like to share?
Well, it's funny because we all have such different resources we're drawn to. And because I've been part of the freedom movement now for so long, that our kids, like my husband's really into, for example, a lot of like the UFO stuff and Stephen Greer and all of that. And not all of us agree with it, but we all have the freedom to have our own beliefs. We talk about it. I recently I found somebody sent me a link. I was in some blog where somebody was claiming that I was, what's it called? Working for the government or something. And they had all these pictures because I'm a metalhead and my husband's a metal artist. So I take a lot of pictures like this. And, that I was like satanic. And it was interesting. So I'm like, guys, look at this. Like, isn't this so interesting? Because when you read it, you could see the pieces they put together. My daughter in a scary Halloween costume. And then so we're talking about it like, wow, like this is really important to remember. Not all conspiracy theories are real. So like, who do we believe? There's extreme conspiracy theories and there's things I don't agree with. And there's obviously mainstream media is like next
Yeah.
level, totally ridiculous. But talking about, well, what do you guys believe? And we had this long conversation about 9/11. And we're going to be watching another documentary about it. And like, none of my kids believe it was, what they said it was, obviously. But then in our life, our family has this full spectrum of their own beliefs. So just because you're alternative, you can't force your beliefs on your kids. My kids have always had
Right.
the freedom to find what feels right to them, and we talk about it. So the sources are always growing with me, but I'm not really on technology very much, actually. I'm studying herbalism. I'm an herbalist. I love plants, gardens. So that's another thing to really remind yourself of, because we can get caught up in that just as much as our kiddos, like with technology, and just to step away, you feel so much better. So yeah, there's a lot of fear-based propaganda out there.
Yeah, and I like your response to that question though, because you were sort of like, from what I understand, is like instilling critical thinking by looking at many different sources. So by saying, well, oh, this might be a little extreme, or what are your thoughts about it? It might also spark some imagination. Like, oh, wow, what if this is possible? Or what if this has happened? And I think that actually probably helped me a ton too, in my process. I don't realize it, but just from asking so many questions and getting just really, really curious, that alone just really opened my mind and helped me journal and helped me write things. Do you ever utilize journaling within this process? I mean, I'm assuming you have writing exercises too.
Not for my kids. They've never had any kind of mandatory thing like that, but they've all used it in different ways. My
Okay.
daughter, Ivy, she was taking college courses toward becoming a veterinarian. She's since changed her mind about that, but she was journaling and taking notes. She's writing a book right now, so she's always writing. Yeah, my daughter Tiffany had a journal for a while. So, it just depends on what resources your kids like. Some people like handwriting, some people like to type and take notes. We have a gratitude journal that we write in almost every night. Like we just share, like, what is everyone thankful for today? And we just write down the date and what we're thankful for. And so that's really nice. So, writing isn't separate from life. Journaling isn't separate from life. It's not like doing English and writing. That doesn't exist in our reality. We just use the tools that we need and love based on, who we are. So
Yeah.
yes, writing happens all the time in various ways.
Well, you're right. I never liked writing or reading in school. And then once I got out of that and I got into subjects I actually cared about and actually were interested in, all of a sudden I was starting to write. All of a sudden I was starting to read. It just happened naturally.
Well, reading, writing, and math are all tools to help us get more of what we want in life or to expand on something. The only time they're miserable to do and kids don't like them is when they're taken out of context and they're not used as a tool and they're used as this rote practice. When there's no internal motivation or no, reason why we're doing it, it doesn't make sense when it's taken out of like the context of it.
Yeah.
So
Makes
kids
it less
learn.
special too.
Yeah, that's a tool. What human being wouldn't want to learn a tool to help them get more of what they want in life or to expand on who they are? So people ask me that all the time, like, how will your kids learn to read, and how old were they when they learned to read, and did they learn this and that? And it's like, it happens so naturally. And no, they never did a school workbook page. They've never been forced to practice handwriting. They've never done anything that looks remotely like school, yet they learned how they learned everything they've needed. So
Mm. So yeah, and you mentioned rote learning, which I think is important to mention because that is alliteration, sort of like repetitive learning, right? Like you do
yeah.
this and do it on repeat all the time, and we see that often within the school system, right? It's like you do this and do it often enough, and then sort of it becomes your conditioning. That goes into the whole idea of indoctrination, correct?
Yeah, and we think it's necessary
Hmm.
because it's what was done to us. It's not, it's never necessary
Yeah.
to ever force anybody or control anybody or reward anyone for writing things over and over and over again. If anything, it's making them less intelligent, because what they'd be doing with their time on their own, if they weren't doing that, would be very probably beneficial to their own growth and learning. So yeah, this keeps kids busy basically.
Yeah, I
It's
think this all these concepts really tie in, even just connecting the concept of slavery versus freedom, because you mentioned, it was freedom that allowed the possibility for kids to choose essentially their own fate, their own destiny, what they want to learn. And slavery, it's like we're in this confinement of what we're told to learn, what to think instead of how to think, right? So I don't
Mhm.
know, do you share with your kids like anything about natural law and morality and the
Oh yeah.
trivium and some of you
Oh
do
yeah.
share all that too?
Oh my goodness, the other day I was in, my kids like know who Mark Passio is, for example, like, because we've been speaking at conferences at the same events for, since 2012 or something. And like, they know the names. To them, like, the people that they know are people that are really awake, because we talk about them a lot. And they don't agree with everything everybody says either. They might be more critical. One of them might be more critical about this, but my son Devin, I was actually kind of cutting and pasting and sending to him a bunch of information about Mark Passio's. He was doing a presentation on fake ass Christians. And so we had this wonderful discussion. I said, I think I remember him saying that. So I sent them to him, and he was like, wow, like, it's so crazy how he swears the way he does, because that would be really against most, Christian beliefs. And I said, yeah, he thinks outside the box and he's finding his own. So we talk about critical thinkers, not in a way like, this is the way you have to be, son. I just
Yeah.
try to bring as many resources into their lives to learn and grow from. So we were talking about Christianity, my son and I. And so because of that, I'm like, what resources and things do I have that I could share with him about, different beliefs surrounding this? So you have to really have a passion for learning, and you kind of have to have a passion for what your kids are presenting with you, because there's no like window of readiness that you might miss if you don't introduce things at certain times. That's a total lie. And we hear that all the time about little kids and stuff. You have to introduce something before age 6. No, the window of readiness is when my kids tell me about something. And I'm like, okay, now's the time. They're in a space to hear about this and learn about it.
Hmm.
My son, with everything, like facilitating my kids learning based on what they love, means to bring as many resources into their life to learn and grow from. And that might be mentorships, and it's all consensual learning. Never, ever have I said, this is really important for you to learn. You have to learn this. And if my kids, I'll offer them things, but if they say, no, I don't really want to do that, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to force them. So, but yes, they're very aware of a lot of all different alternative beliefs. And the other interesting thing is my beliefs have been growing and changing too. So I talk about that. I'm really interested in human expansion and my own evolution. So I talk about, wow, like, I'm really feeling differently about X, Y, Z. Or, wow, guys, listen to this. It might sound crazy, but just listen to this, like, a podcast with me if you want to. And
Yeah.
we need to reawaken our desire for learning and growth.
I
as
feel
human
like we can learn from them too, right? Like
Oh, yeah, so much.
they'll
Yes.
ask questions we'll not think about, or they have like a blank slate where it's like all this new stuff is coming to them, and you have a whole worldview that you've built over many years. You've sort of detached from that, but like here's a new being into this world who has a fresh mind, able to ask questions that you maybe haven't considered. I just think that's amazing. You know, like it's the magic of mirroring in coaching, where you talk about something or you question something and it sort of reflects back to you.
Mhm. For sure, yeah. So that's basically how we've always lived. And you can never really guess what your kids are meant to be and do in life. It's their journey. You can only facilitate it. And it might surprise you the direction that your kids take, because it's funny, but you can't really get attached too much to what they're doing in the moment, because they will only do something for as long as they're interested. And so when Devin was really, really into blacksmithing, and he was giving survival classes on our property in New Hampshire, winter survival, summer survival. He was building his own like outdoor shelters. And in my mind, you know, he's my first child. I'm like, wow, this is going to be amazing. He's going to be like probably have his own survival show where he'll be doing all these survival things and helping people. I started to get attached to that identity of who he was. And then he just, you know, takes a totally different turn. And, you know, I think that's so important that one day we were in the grocery store. My daughter Ivy was about 11. She's 17 now. And somebody said, oh, we saw you on this show. You look familiar. And we were talking to them, which would happen a lot a couple of years ago, but not since we moved to Miami. And somebody said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Ivy just looked at me. And it was just kind of this funny moment, you know, where later I said, well, adults ask kids that all the time. And Ivy said, well, what do you mean, to the lady? And she said, what do you want to be? She said, but I'm something now. I run an animal rescue and this and that and this. And the woman was like, oh, okay. You know, so it's coming away from this preparation for the future mindset as far as childhood being preparation for adulthood. My kids have no concept of that, really. I mean, we do talk about things in the future, but whatever they are now is a profession, is who they are. It's like, it's not like you need to be preparing for this one profession someday.
Right. It's like if you want to start growing food, just put a seed in the ground, you know, get the soil, like you can prepare it now. You don't have to like read a whole curriculum first before you do it.
Right. Childhood isn't preparation, shouldn't be preparation for life. Childhood is life now.
Right.
So it is a big shift to take and to facilitate that. And it takes a lot of trust and letting go of fear.
Yeah,
Well.
I just feel like you can also relate so many of these concepts to adults. I mean, nowadays, because you say, without freedom, children make unhealthy choices. That's one of the quotes that I took from your book. I mean, it's like, without freedom, adults make unhealthy choices. I mean, we see this as reflective in so many adults. Even Mark Pastor will say they're acting like children because he's saying like they need to grow up, they need to use their reasoning powers. But like, even worse, I feel like they're not children either, because children would even know better. Like, don't take this from a fellow human being, you know, make sure to share. I feel like some simple concepts of morality even children understand, but us adults we get so wrapped in the terminology of taxation and legalese that we sometimes just mix with all this stuff.
Yeah, and it's a big responsibility to become a parent, because children learn from how you are in this world. And so if you can't punish or threaten or control a child into being moral, you can't control it. It actually makes them be the total opposite. You know, force and coercion and threatening and punishments and control,
Right.
that doesn't produce moral, you know, good people following their intuition, following their inner guidance at all. It does the total opposite. It pulls them further from that, because you're giving them mixed messages constantly. You know, this hurts me more than it hurts you, and I know better, and all these other things. It warps the human condition and makes them more and more enslaved. So that's a very important thing to remember. You need to take responsibility and be a moral person. And, you know, many of us coming to this life, we're kind of maybe more on the fringe. We've had to do a lot of internal growing and healing to be able to be kind, loving, compassionate people. Our society is not kind, loving, and compassionate generally, you know, in the way that, you know, statism is. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So,
I want to talk about that a little bit too, but before we get into that, I pulled this one quote that I really like from your book, and if you don't mind, I want to read it, because it really
Sure.
summarizes a lot of what we talked about. It says, unschooling philosophy frees you to trust your children in their ability to learn what they need in life as they need it, by giving them the freedom that all humans deserve. Learning through life is as natural as growing physically and emotionally. Reading, writing, and math are all tools our kids will pick up since we live a life surrounded by the written word and use numbers and math naturally every day. What use would learning these things even be if they weren't already part of our lives? Just like babies learn to walk and talk because these skills are useful tools to help them get what they want, so are the basics useful, desirable tools for our kids to get what they want in life. With this understanding, we see that like a baby will learn to walk and talk when ready without ever needing classes, the same is true for older kids with skills like reading and writing. I watch my children learn all of the necessary skills and tools they need to achieve their own personal goals in life. I really like that analogy you use with like the baby learns to walk on their own, so to speak, if you just give them some time. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder when the walking and talking classes though are going to come to be. You wait and see. People will find money in that somehow and start making parents doubt that it's possible without classes. You know, that's how this all happened, is like the state slowly undermines parents' ability, their inner knowing and their instinct to know that children will grow and evolve.
Yeah.
They've made us so dependent that we're petrified to trust our kids in the same way. So
Yeah.
hopefully my work and that of many others is going to help free people of that fear, because we're living examples that it's possible.
Yeah, and I think of responsibility when you mentioned that, like people, the fact that they've gotten parents to abdicate their responsibility of their own children, so it tells you of where we are in society. You know,
Yeah.
not just responsibility of their own property and what they earn and what they own, but their own children. I mean, like it's just, this is insane. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, because if clearly, you know, we live in a world where we do want to, you know, affect change in our local level and with our kids and with ourselves first and foremost. But there's this huge world out there, which we always tend to look at the external sometimes a bit too much. But there's that world out there with a bunch of people and some few people who call themselves government who claim to rule over everybody else. There's this belief called statism, which is the belief that that's legitimate. Now, I like how you like sort of introduce a lot of that to your kids just gradually by asking questions and introducing different sources, because I feel like they can understand this on their own. But how about you? Like you had to get there somehow. You had to like get out of this mindset and understand a lot of these concepts for yourself. What started you on your process to unschooling yourself, and how did you get out of that belief of statism?
The funny thing was, I never even really paid much attention to politics or government at all, to be honest, even though I was living in this country. But it just never interested me. And we had to learn about it in school, and I was glad that we didn't focus a lot on it. But parenting really is what did it. You know, I feel like the way that I've always parented my kids, as time has gone on, the more interviews I've done, you know, I think the first interview I ever did was like with somebody who was like libertarian anarchist, like more freedom minded, because prior to my interviews or me stepping into that space, I was mostly with naturally minded moms, you know, home birthing moms, and like, you know, just the naturally minded community of mothers would want to hear what I had to say. And I'd speak at La Leche League meetings, which is like a breastfeeding support group. And I kind of got pulled into the sphere. And I think it was Stefan Molyneux was the first person. Now I know he's in a different place now, and you know, I don't really follow him, but I had no idea that he was as big as he was. And so I was on his show, and then apparently I got so many messages. I said, wow, I guess this guy was a big deal at one point. And I had all these requests from all different talk shows. It was before all this drama and stuff within these communities, but it was Jeff Berwick and Adam Kokesh and like all of these different people. And they're like, what you're doing at home really sounds a lot like anarchy. You know, anarchism philosophy or a more libertarian mindset. And I was like, it is. And then I learned about, I'm like, oh my gosh, it is. So parenting this way in a partnership-based paradigm is like a mini microcosm of what the philosophy we all want for the world, you know, in a not having a ruler. I'm not my child's ruler. I'm their facilitator. I'm not a teacher standing in front of them, forcing them to learn things against their will with good intentions. I'm a facilitator, and I need to facilitate things and help them grow and navigate and have information. So, you know, it was this realization that, oh my gosh, I understand government now. Really, parenting helped me really get what was going on in the world, is where it started me from. And once you start living in freedom in one area of your life, because most people don't know they're enslaved, they have no idea. And that's the whole the whole beauty of it for those enslaving is it's like this manipulation. And but once you realize and you're living without this dynamic, you can't help but let it touch other areas of your life little by little. You know, my stuff in the beginning was about birth and freedom, and realizing that hospitals are really not the healthiest place to give birth, and they're dangerous actually because they're pushing interventions for money. So freedom in that realm, and then freedom in, you know, food, growing food, and what's happening with organics and GMOs, and like everything gets touched when you open your mind in one area. So we just are all starting out in a different place. So when I started speaking at like anarchist events, there usually was like 2 women there, and the rest were all young men, most of which didn't have families. And I never in a million years thought I'd be sharing to that demographic. However, that introduced, you know, their interest in government politics, and anarchism is what interested them in this type of parenting. So now it's health freedom. That was never a thing before COVID. Now it's all these health freedom pioneers finding unschooling because they're all in a partnership-based paradigm.
Right.
So many things are in an authoritarian paradigm that once you heal from one and recognize it, everything else, you know, it's easier to kind of get. And I don't know about you, but I'm hungry to learn more always. Like, where else is there an authoritarian paradigm that I'm not realizing?
Yeah.
And yeah, religion, another one that I'm really interested in. So
Yeah. I get you. There's a screaming bird in the background.
Oh, I thought it was a child. My brain is so wired to
No,
hearing.
it's a bird, very loud bird. He screams all the time, but yeah, if you live with a green-winged macaw, you would know it's like the second largest parrot in America, so it's like
Oh,
very
wow.
loud.
I
Your
really
ears
want
will
to.
be pierced, so probably worse than children, honestly. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I like everything that you mentioned, and it's true. Like, I actually really like the fact that I'm starting to see like health professionals in this movement. I mean, like I told you, I never expected to get involved with Mark Passio or any of this stuff. I was in
Right.
the health field too, and then I got out of it. I'm like, oh shoot. This goes deeper than this. There's corruption here in the health field. I can't, give my services to certain clients because of insurance, and the doctors aren't going to accept my practice because it's nutrition, and you can't patent natural medicine and all this other stuff. It was just astonishing because I had to like naturally get there. I had no choice really but to go to freedom, especially as the other events happened in the past couple of years. It became evident I had to change my priorities and say, well, freedom is more important, because like you said, like without freedom you can't even have the choice of what you want to do with your kids. Without freedom you don't even have the choice of what you want to do with birthing, parenting, health choices, anything really. So that's paramount, and I'm glad that you were willing to look at that as a subject, and I'm glad that there's a lot of professional people and people who are carrying themselves well, and they're not wrapped in the ideologies or the politics of this. They're looking at it purely from a human, like, fundamental sense. Like, we just want to be free. We're naturally free. That's it. Like, no labels, no strings attached, no identities.
Yeah, exactly. And one important thing I just want to add is human beings and new parents are conditioned to distrust themselves. And this is why the work, for me, my work with birth is the most important, to be honest, because when you go into a hospital to give birth and it's medically managed, there's so many things acting against the woman to have her doubt herself, which leads to needing to be rescued or saved from complications. And when you think your own body didn't work properly, it is a spiral downward of like distrusting yourself and like turning to experts. The doctor creates the problems that they then save you from, and you're thanking them for saving your baby's life, and they're telling you your body didn't work properly. And that is the very, very beginning where the deepest parenting patterns are set for both the child and the mother. And so when you start from that place, you turn to experts for everything. I say experts as in quotes, but you turn to authorities for everything. Well, how much should I feed my baby? I'm not making enough milk. And oh gosh, I couldn't even imagine educating them. I better send them to school. Keeping a woman like controlled and never triggering that, intuitive wisdom allows statism to function as it does. It all starts there. When we can just encourage a woman from the beginning to trust herself and to do so safely, and finding the people that believe in her and that will help her create something. A fiercely protective mother's born, and that intuition is sometimes for the very first time, Corey, is ignited and listened to, because we've suppressed it so much that when we can rekindle those flames, people slip into trusting themselves for everything with their kids. They're not subbing it out to all these different people because they don't think they can do it. So I think statism begins at birth.
Yeah, you're right.
I think it's intended that way.
Yeah, we even see, I don't know if you know about the birth certificates that are announced at birth too. That has a lot to do with the current world and how they get us into the system with the corporations and making straw man names of you so they can put taxes upon you and have you registered in their system and a bunch of other things just from signing a document, and making sure you do that. I've literally met parents where their child was taken away from them at the hospital because they refused to sign the birth certificate. I mean, this is a reoccurring theme, and that just shows you, it's like, are we enslaved? Well, how much evidence do you need? If you disobey, you're going to be violently imposed upon, thrown in the cage, and not allowed to, do certain things. Your money, what you earn, is being taxed upon, stolen from you. I mean, how much evidence do people need to start to realize that there is that sort of dynamic? I mean, it's incredible, but one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about like imposing, and this is like one of my final questions that I would want to ask you about, and you can be completely honest with me, whatever you want to say. When it comes to like imposing diet, when it comes to health, because I'm a health coach, I don't like to impose diet. Like you, I like to listen to the individual and find out what is it that they need. I trust their body and their wisdom, and depending on their environments and what's going on. So when it comes to your children, there's a lot of people who are saying like veganism is the most moral way, and this is the most, everybody has to do this and that. Do you prescribe to that vegan mindset, or do you think it's important that parents really look at their options, like raw animal products, like raw milk, in case they can't produce breast milk, for example, and looking at these products that are banned from the government because they know it's really helping a lot of people?
Well, 99.9% of women can produce breast milk, but that's a different conversation.
Wow.
But yeah, so I've been vegan for 10 years and my kids have always had the freedom to choose. 2 of them are vegan. Devon's not, and Tiffany's not. I've always supported it. I was vegan and cooking my son's steaks. So it's their journey, and no agenda, not even a vegan agenda, no agenda comes before my children and their needs and their choices ever. Which is kind of funny because I get a lot of crap from the vegan community. Like, how can you let your kids eat meat? I'm like, because I trust their bodies. I trust what they're drawn to. I don't think veganism, like I know I don't know everything. In fact, the older I get, the more I realize I have a lot to learn. Right now, for me, this works, but I trust Devon, as much more than probably I trust myself, even because of my own damage from my past. But he enjoys it. He feels it makes him strong. His siblings, like Ivy's kind of an animal activist, so she'll tease him about it. Like, how's your flesh, Devon? But, it's always been just this fun part of, not fun, but sometimes funny, but a part of my life where I facilitated it always, whatever they want, whatever they're drawn to. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to respect all my kids. Ivy didn't like any animal products on one, we took one shelf of the fridge that was for animal products and we kept them there. Like, we wanted to respect everybody's needs and wishes, and it can be done. And so I've gone to vegan protests with Ivy because she wants to be there, and then gone home with my son Devon and collected eggs up at Nana's and brought them down and made him scrambled eggs. I don't eat it, but I'm so happy to facilitate whatever he needs, so it's kind of confusing for some people because they always think they're going to catch me. Well, what about if your sons want to, or your kids want to eat animal products? It's like, well, I would buy it for them then and support them. Yeah. We have separate pans in our house for animal products to respect those that don't want to use the same pans. Sometimes it's a little bit of a pain, but you learn how to navigate it all to meet the needs of everybody.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. I mean, like, people want to fit you into a box and you're like, nope, can't do that.
Exactly. They try to all the time, and they're like, well, how do you, my kids, we've always watched documentaries together too and research things. We watched Cowspiracy, the first time many years ago, and Devon became vegan for a while. I didn't have him watch it with that intention either. I have no attachment at all. And I'm not more happy when my kids are vegan. I'm not. All I want them to do is be true to themselves. And that's a really hard concept for people to grasp when they get super passionate about their own agenda, that they want, and they think it's best. I don't think that what I'm doing is necessarily best. It's what I know, and I'm doing the best I can right now. but I'm willing to grow and learn and be open to it always.
Yeah.
So
And that's good wisdom to pass on too, to your children. It's like, say, hey, have an open mind to other people, and you're basically saying to them, don't impose your opinion on others, so to speak too.
yeah.
At the same time, you could share your ideas, you can educate them, you can ask questions, but you wouldn't violently impose it like we do in the case of government, for example.
No,
But
no. And I try to stay away from like real dogmatic approaches to things, because we could easily fear others into doing what we're doing. I could fear people into having a home birth by talking about the dangers of hospital birth in such a way, but I've really come in more to a place of like, I don't want to use the tools that government and authoritarian,
Right.
statists use to get people to do things. That's lazy. It's not very intelligent. Instead, trust people. If they want information from you about why you are the way you are, or why you have the choices, you've made the choice you make, give them information and support them. And that's where I'm at with
Yeah.
everything in my life.
I really like the way that you carry yourself and deliver this message. I just want to put that out there because it's very open-minded, very open-hearted, and you're considering many different factors here. You're not just willing to say, do this and that's it, that's the solution. So I appreciate that. But would you say there's any action necessary? This is my last question, official last question. Like for independent media, people who are producing content out there, they're like, you need to see the truth and look at what's going on. Do you think there's certain things that they need to do that they aren't doing that you would like to be seeing done personally in the independent media that would help create more of a change in the world and help steer things more toward this direction of freedom?
I think it takes all kinds of messengers, all kinds of different ways to convey information, because there's so many different places that people are at to be able to hear it.
Yeah.
A more authoritarian approach for some people works because that's what they're comfortable with. You can fear. There's a lot of documentaries that are really fear-based, and you can convince somebody in a second to like have your view by showing them. And some people, they just understand that more. I think people need to heal from their childhoods, and not only that, but from being, from statism in general. It's a very abusive, damaging, life-altering experience to recognize, be aware, and then look at ourselves and say, in what ways am I still controlling others or wanting to? In what ways am I still in fear? So as far as media goes, I just think keep offering. The only place to ever come from is your authentic self. When you're speaking and presenting content in media from your authentic place, the perfect people will be drawn to it. Because if you're trying to fit in and saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't use fear because I'll get more people, or maybe I shouldn't cover this and I shouldn't approach it like this, you're losing sight of who you are. Like your message has to come from here in whatever way it creatively comes out. There will always be someone to judge and criticize and give you helpful tips on how to make it better. The truth is you are an individual person bringing a message that only you can bring, and do it in whatever way, and then be willing to evolve. I'm sure every person that's producing content in the freedom movement has evolved from their first video, from their first, place. And that is the journey. We all have so much more healing and growth to do. So that would be my answer.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I always like to get people's views on that. And I think, we can generally agree, we want a better world out there, and there are solutions that people can utilize right now. They don't have to wait. And I encourage people to check out your book, Radical Unschooling: A Revolution Has Begun, because it really goes into all these concepts in detail too. So everybody check out that resource that she's providing here for the summit for everybody. And thank you for doing that, by the way. I'm also offering my book for free as well, Slavery Gone for Good. So thank you so much as a fellow author.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you just for being here and sharing everything. I appreciate it so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you. So that's Dana Martin, everybody. Check out her links and all her great content and her website, danamartin.com. And like I said, if you want to see a lot more resources like the ones that we're offering, and a lot more speakers that are talking about a lot of important topics like this, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. Thank you very much for watching. This is the End of Slavery Summit. Take care.
Great stuff. All right, so that's Dana Martin, for those of you who did not know. And we're going to start the next one right after that. The next one is with Graham Wright. But yeah, so Dana Martin is apparent, and she has done so much great work with that. She still has a lot of great things on her website, things you can get involved with if you really want to. Corey's gone. If you want him to come back, yeah, exactly. If you want me to go on camera, you got to do something special. No, just kidding. So, but yeah, I really, Dana was a really good talk, and I really appreciate talking to her. This next talk is also really awesome, and I like the fact that we have a variety of different topics. So this one is going to spark a lot of interest in you guys if you guys really like questioning what does the future world look like, and how do we handle problems without a coercive monopoly of a state that we have in the world. And frankly, he really breaks it down. He makes it really simple for people. His animations does the same thing. So I think you guys will appreciate this. I love his voice as well. If you're listening to this at work or wherever you are, this is perfect to listen to. Because his voice, and a lot of people compliment his voice. They say, you should do an audiobook. You'll find out what I mean by saying that. But here we go. Graham Wright, his channel is Man Against the State. Remember that. Man Against the State. A lot of the animations we played before was from him. And we're going to play actually one more animation from him tonight. A 4-part series all together, which goes over how everything works without government, basically. And it's about 20 minutes long. That'll be later on tonight if you stick around. But for now, we're going to watch his interview, and he's going to break it down for us. Let's get started.
Welcome. This is Corey Angelot. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, Graham Wright. He also goes by the nickname Man Against the State on several different platforms. You can find him on YouTube. His website is managainstthestate.com, and he's also got an Odyssey channel where he has a lot more of his redone animations. That's how I found him. His animations are incredible. He really breaks down economic concepts and concepts of how the free world would look. And how things would get done. So we're going to be talking about that. Really interesting conversation. Could you introduce a little bit about yourself? Welcome. I'm glad to have found your works.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me. Yeah, so I'm Graham Wright. I've been a libertarian anarchist for 15 years now, since 2007. And we can go into my story of how I became a libertarian. Ron Paul was a very important part of that for me. And shortly after I kind of found Ron Paul and found my philosophical home and started learning a lot more about it, then I felt the need to kind of share what I'd learned with others. And that's when I started my YouTube channel, Man Against the State. I specifically wanted to explain a topic which I felt was not well understood among libertarian anarchists, which is how a free market legal system could work. So how could you have law without government? I found that a difficult question to grapple with when I was thinking about it. And I thought after I'd done all that research and got it kind of clear in my head, I thought I could explain it to others. And I started my YouTube channel specifically to do that. So that was my Law Without Government series, which I think was fairly successful. And I've had lots of feedback on that, people telling me it was quite helpful. And then from then on, my channel is mainly based on audio now. So the feedback that I had on some of my early videos was that people liked my voice, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting that kind of feedback, but they said that I have a nice voice to listen to and that I should try narrating audiobooks, which I did. So I then started uploading any kind of article or chapter of a book that I thought was really good and I wanted to share with people. I thought I'll make an audio version of it and just read it into my computer and then put it up on my channel. So I've got over 50, I think, on there now, of narrations of various things that have interested me over the years, and that's just become sort of my way of sharing stuff, really.
Yeah, and I feel like people really like animations. I've told you before, it really caught my eye, and the way you narrated it was, it was simple and it didn't need to be crazy, like complicated. It just got the point really clear. And like even the one where you have the alien who comes down to Earth and is asking questions like, what is government? Like it's a simple concept that you can do so much with, and I really thought that was a good idea. And you're right, your voice is amazing, by the way. You know, and I think that's, as content creators, when we're first producing, we always get self-conscious, like, I don't like hearing my voice, I don't like seeing myself, but your voice is really good, I'd say, for narration and these types of things. So to the person who looks at a free world and looks at the word anarchy, they're like, oh my gosh, well, how would things work, you know, without the state, and who will build the roads? What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it comes down to monopoly versus competition. In every kind of area, in every industry in the world, we've always got the same question: do we want it to be run by a monopoly, or do we want free market competition? And I was reading the kind of the economics and learning that kind of in general, and then it's just a case of applying it to every industry. It's like, well, should we have schools? Should they be run by a government monopoly, or should we have free market competition? Well, the answer is always the same. It's always free market competition. And it's fairly easy to see that for things, something like schools or hospitals, or even like roads. Maybe a little bit more difficult with roads, but then you go a layer down and you can go into the even more difficult ones, which are like security and military and law. Because it's like, when I first was contemplating that, I was like, how on earth could you have law without government? It just seems such a bizarre concept to me when I first came across it. But it was, yeah, once I properly kind of learned the economics of it and learned how it applies to that specific industry, I suddenly realized not only can you have law without government, but it would be way better. The laws would be so much better if they're produced by a free market, which isn't really a surprising result, because the free market does everything better than the government. Yeah. So it shouldn't be that surprising, but it does take a lot of kind of intellectual work to get your head around how could that possibly work.
Yeah, and so you mentioned law without government. I think, you know, as somebody who talks about natural law, and a lot of the other people I've talked to, we talk about natural law. For us, looking at that type of law versus man's law, we can already deduce and say, well, there is something higher and more important to look at. But I like the way you also put it in the animation. You're like, there's multiple producers of law, and nobody is above the law to tell everyone else how everything should operate. Like, it was a really interesting way of looking at it, and you used like a simple line and putting a person above that line to represent like the law. Like, simple things like that, for me, synced in my mind, and I remember that, you know. And I think for the person who's completely new to these concepts, that can make a pretty big impact. Like, you and I talked before about Larkin Rose. He did a video on the tiny dot. I mean, it's literally a dot, but that one is one of his most successful videos. Meanwhile, he's got tons of other videos that are like double, triple in length that don't get nearly as many views, because they're not like simple animations that really make people think about these concepts. So what would you have to say about like the person who's like wants to apply communism and other forms of economics? Are you against that, or would you be open to that? How do you feel about people who think capitalism is the enemy?
Well, this was one of the reasons I wanted to make this law without government video, because the framework that I present there is indifferent to any particular system. It's not capitalist, it's not communist. It's just saying this is how it could work at a kind of macro level. And then within that, you can have all kinds of different legal systems operating at once. So, you know, if you've got some communists that want to go and set up their own commune, they're welcome to do that. That kind of work, it fits within the kind of framework that I've outlined in that video. And then you can have different communities where you have different rules. So there's this kind of plurality of rule systems that can all kind of coexist together. We don't need kind of one overarching, these are the rules for the whole land or the whole world. You can actually have different communities doing their own things.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I like the way that you look at that, because I look at it the same way. You know, if people want to try something, and essentially you can look at it as sort of competition, but you can look at it as like people want to live their life as they want to live their life, as long as they don't use violence to coerce others against their will into saying this is the way it has to be, right? Where again, they put themselves above the law, so to speak. Say, I'm the producer of law, no one else is, you know, type of deal. So it's a voluntary relationship. I appreciate that, because some people would have very strong views. They'd be like, no, I can't do this. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's your personal view, but like, you get violence is still like, we're still looking at morality here, you know, past the economics. Some people want to look at just the economics, and I feel like it's not necessarily holistic without the morality. right? I don't know how you
Yeah.
feel about that, but just figured to put that out there. So, you have personal experiences as well, like with this belief system. You said, like, Ron Paul helped you get out of this. For a lot of people I talk to, Ron Paul is like the person, and it's amazing to me because he's not somebody who's necessarily professed in a lot of this stuff either. But he definitely questioned a lot of things, and
Mm.
because of that, I think it sparked so many light bulbs in everybody's heads that they started going on all these researching and finding out all these people who wrote all these books. And he's aware about a lot of things too. But like, was it really hard for you to get out of statism, this belief we call in government, in the fact that, oh, we need government to provide these services? Was it really hard for you to get out of that? Like, how long did it take? Because for me, it took some time. I had to ask myself questions. If I had your animations earlier on, I probably would have snapped out of it even quicker. But I had Larkin Rose's 5 questions. High Impact Flicks, he made a video on 7 questions, and those really stuck with me because I kept asking myself those questions. And then over time, I found videos like yours, and that just really helped encapsulate them. So, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was very hard. I'd say I had the advantage of being quite apolitical up until 2007. So I wasn't like in my youth, like a political activist type. So I didn't really have any kind of existing ideological commitments. I was just your typical statist, the product of a public schooling system. So I believed what everyone else believed. I think what Ron Paul gave to me was the idea that you can have a philosophical basis for your political positions. I think up until that point, when I'd seen politicians, on TV, they all just kind of seem to be making up as they go along. There's no kind of consistency. They're saying what people want to hear, and there was no kind of system to it, and this is what made politics not appeal to me, I think, because I'm quite a systematic thinker. And seeing all these people just sort of coming up with policy on the fly, kind of ad hoc, with no consistency to it, turned me away. But then I saw Ron Paul, and when I saw there was this kind of movement building behind him on the internet, and I was kind of intrigued about how could one man sort of have that kind of effect that I've never seen a politician have before. But as soon as I saw his interviews and it saw him on the debate stage, I got it straight away. I was like, oh, yeah, now I understand why this man's so unique and so brilliant, because he's got a philosophy behind it, what he's saying. I disagreed with most things that he said when I was first watching those videos, but I could tell that he had good reasons for saying everything he was saying. So, like, for example, healthcare, like as a standard Brit, I was very pro kind of government healthcare system. I was like, you crazy Americans with your free market system, you're insane. And I was listening to Ron Paul, and he was saying, we should have less government in healthcare. I was like, what? Less government in healthcare? That's not the way to go. But I could tell there was reasons why he was saying that, and he named names. He said, I think, Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. He was talking about his the academics that had inspired him. And I thought, well, I need to go and read these guys. I need to go and read what they're saying. So I did that. I read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, which is very good, and The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. Those two together I was reading, and I kind of suddenly come to the realization that I've been all wrong about politics, and collectivism is not the right way of thinking about things. You need to think in terms of individualism, think of like individual rights, rather than thinking of the world as a war between groups, which is how sort of collectivists think. So then when I kind of understood the right way of thinking about things politically, and I started learning economics, I suddenly realized, oh yeah, Ron Paul is right about all these things that I thought he was wrong about. Of course he's right. We need free market healthcare. Of course I was wrong to think only the police should have guns, which is what I used to think before. It's just, I now see the arguments. So I think probably from the time I first saw Ron Paul to the time when I was kind of calling myself a small government libertarian, probably only about 6 months. It didn't take me that long. It was the ethical argument that got me first, though. He was saying, taxation is theft, which I thought was a very kind of strong statement. But then, you spend a few minutes thinking about it and you're like, well, yeah, it is. Of course it is. It's, taking money off someone at the point of a gun. What is that but theft? Of course that's theft. So then I was like, okay, well, taxation is unethical. And I was kind of really driven to kind of, right, we need less taxes, we need less government, from a kind of ethical point of view, because it's just wrong the way things are being done at the moment. And then I got to a key point where I was a kind of a minarchist. I kind of thought, let's get rid of the government out of all of these industries apart from three. We need the government for courts, police, and military. That was the kind of my minarchist position, and that's where I got to with sort of Ron Paul and Friedrich Hayek, that line of thinking. And then there was a whole stage after that when I got from the small state libertarian to libertarian anarchist, which was probably about a year. And that was mostly grappling with law and how you can have polycentric legal systems and have the lack of a monopoly, and how that could work. So it really was, it was the ethics that drove me, but it was the economics that pushed me over the line, I think is how I would say it.
Yeah, because then you saw it like in action, like this is how it will work, because so many people like make all these justifications like, hey, well, if we don't have this, what about this? If we don't have this, it's a necessary evil, people say. I'm like, interesting, a necessary evil. And I just really run through these people's thoughts like, are you sure? Necessary evil. I mean, it's like we can say the same thing about the chattel slavery that occurred for over 4,000, 5,000 years, and everybody was okay with it, thought it was natural and normal to society, and, everybody thought it was necessary for the economy. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, we don't need it, and cotton production's even better. It's like, what? And so it's like, it's because of the morality that we challenge these things, and then we realize it's not a necessary evil. If it's evil, we recognize it's evil. Why don't we find solutions? Especially now we have technology and way more innovation than ever, and what freedom allows us to have is more innovation than ever. I think it's incredible. So you mentioned police and military. I feel like this holds a lot of people back. So you said based on your own testimony, this is a topic that was pretty heavy. And I think even for me, it's like, if somebody expects me to describe how everything would look in a free world, it's like, am I really solely responsible for that? Like, what are you going to do when someone gets hurt? Are you just going to stand there and watch them? Like, you got to take some personal responsibility. I think that's part of the key to our freedom in the first place. But like, a lot of people will say, well, we need someone to protect our assets, protect our rights. So what would you have to say about that, and how do we solve police and military problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely understand that motivation. I feel like I need someone that's going to protect my property. If somebody is invading my property, I definitely want someone to call that'll come and help me. That's a service that I value. But the question is, should that service be provided by a government, or should it be provided on the free market? And I think we can have that kind of thing on the free market. If there's demand for something, entrepreneurs will supply it, and they'll find the optimal ways of supplying it. So people shouldn't get into the mistake of thinking that we either have a state or we have lawlessness. There's something in the middle of those two. There's law without the state. So it's not like it's either a state or it's chaos. There's actually this point in the middle where it's kind of optimized. So you can subscribe to a private security firm who will deliver you the kind of service you want. If you just want like an emergency number, I'm sure you'll be able to buy that as a kind of relatively cheap package. If you wanted patrols outside your house, or like a permanent bodyguard at your gate, or whatever, whatever level of security you want and you're prepared to pay for, there'll be someone on the market willing to provide that service to you. And then we'll get all the benefits of competition as well. So you're never going to get a situation where you have like police brutality. That only happens when you have a monopoly, because if you had competition, then they would lose customers if they were behaving like that. They would be shown up by their competitors, and then you vote with your money. You move it from an agency that you think's taking bad actions to an agency that's taking good actions. So you've got this kind of the pressure from the market to always improve and always deliver a better service. So yeah, if you're concerned about kind of security, you should be an anarchist because security would be much better under anarchy.
Yeah.
People would be much safer.
Now, what about the argument, like with people saying, well, let's say we free ourselves and we live in anarchy, but there's still China or these other countries that are still living in governments. Therefore, that justifies for some reason our slavery. But therefore, how will we protect ourselves against them, even though the Americans basically revolted against the British with like barely any good arms, like against the most powerful government in the world at the time? You know, a bunch of farmers got together and said, we're going to revolt. Like that's pretty amazing to me. But what would you have to say about like military invasions and stuff like that?
Well, yeah. So military is just kind of a variation on security. Military is just kind of security on a big scale, which does introduce a few problems around kind of public goods and free riding and things like that. But they're not insoluble problems. In terms of like an anarchist society living next door to a state with a dictator or something, I would say you're actually safer in an anarchist society than you are in a state society if you're living next door to a dictator. For one thing, because there's less incentive for a dictator to take over an anarchist society because there's nothing really for them to take over. There's no state apparatus then there for them to utilize. And usually when two states go to war, the winner takes over the apparatus of the loser. And then, you know, that's like an empire. They just replace the previous rulers. But if you've got a society that has no rulers at all, there's no kind of apparatus of ruling for a dictator to take over. So there's less incentive for them to invade. And then if they do invade, your defense forces should be highly incentivized to defend your property because that you're paying customers. You're going to really make sure that the customers aren't suffering from a potential invasion, and you're going to have lots of different agencies all joining the kind of fight. And it's not going to be kind of centrally controlled by one state. So you're not going to have like all your eggs in one basket. You're going to have lots of different agencies all trying to repel this invasion if it should ever happen. So it's a case of I think the market can do defense better than the state does defense.
Really good point. Like that perspective, I think, is really good because you're saying like people recognize and they don't live with rulers. So even if people proclaim to say, I am your ruler now, it's not going to make a difference because those people already recognize there's no need for rulers. There is no rulers. So you can't really change that. When people own themselves and they recognize that and they practice that, you can't really undo that unless you use perhaps, I guess, a lot of violence upon that individual, but that would require that individual to submit, to surrender. And, I don't think people who want to be free, who are free, are going to want to give up their freedom so easily. I mean, that's the whole point of defending our rights and assets as such. And again, like you said before, sort of we have to look at it on an individual basis. When people make these justifications for these systems, they may not realize they're making a collectivist argument, right? Like, I want to violate the rights of the individual for the so-called rights of the collective. Like, what is that? We don't know. We can't really get clear as to what that is, and we can make tons of justifications. We have to be very careful. What would you have to say about the people who say, well, if government is just a monopoly and it's just a gang per se, well, wouldn't there just be another gang or a group of warlords who just take over? This is another thing people say.
Well, my answer to that is yes, there will be if people still believe they need a ruler. If you shake off one ruler but you still think you need a ruler, then of course another one's going to pop up. So the way to prevent that happening is for people to reject the idea of being ruled anymore. I mean, it's like any other kind of barbaric practices from the past that we've kind of moved on from now. It's like, are they going to come back? Well, I mean, they might, like burning witches or something. Like, is that going to happen again? Probably not. But if people start believing in witches again, then yeah, it will. So there is a kind of a truth to that quote about eternal vigilance. You do kind of need to constantly make sure that nobody's going to rule over you. But the best possible starting place for that is to have anarchy, because there's nothing there at all for a potential tyrant to kind of get hold of. If you have a minarchist government, if you have courts, police, and military run by the government, I mean, that's like an open invitation for a wannabe tyrant. All they've got to do is take over the state, and then they can start, spreading their power and doing whatever atrocities they plan to do.
Yeah.
So you've got to kind of get rid of the state entirely, and there's nothing for them to do. They can become they can become rich. They become head of a powerful security agency, but they don't have any special rights. They don't have any special privileges from that. They're just an ordinary person. And if people are vigilant and they're looking out for this, they're going to keep an eye on these people that have kind of a lot of economic power to make sure it doesn't become political power, and make sure they don't go from being a head of a security firm to a government. Because that's the key point there, is when it becomes a monopoly. So you want to stop it before that point. And I don't think that would be a very difficult thing to do once you've got a society where people are no longer willing to put up with being ruled. I think it's going to be difficult to prevent a new ruler from happening. So you're the worst people in society would then just be petty thieves and thugs who don't have the law on their side, so they're relatively harmless.
And everybody sees them as wrong. They don't see them as morally legitimate for doing what they're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the key difference with the state, really, isn't it? It's a gang of thieves with very good propaganda, because they've somehow convinced their victims that the gang is necessary and that we steal for your own good, kind of thing. So they are very good at propaganda. They've convinced people they're legitimate, and without that, there'd be nothing.
Yeah, I really like the way you break this down. For me, it's really simple to understand. I know that somebody listening who may be new to all this and may not be as simple at first, especially if you're new to these concepts, but I think when you understand them and you just think about it, you start to realize this is not at all really hard to grasp what we're saying. And I was telling you before, it's we're having a yard sale, we're having farmers markets, stuff like that, where people are practicing voluntary exchanges, right? I mean, that right there is evidence of people coming together without the need of violence, people working together for products or goods that they need. And so I think that's really interesting. And then you also mentioned the fact of education, and the need for that. And that's why, we talk about statism. We identify it as a belief system, something that a lot of people have and struggle with, including ourselves. And we use ourselves as saying, this is a personal testimony to the fact that we ourselves struggled with that. And a lot of other people are, so it's okay. We're not special just because we came across that belief system where, it doesn't make us morally superior. It makes us simply recognize something that we should have already, something we should recognize as a human species. I think it's part of our evolution as humanity. And when we share that moral knowledge, it's probably going to get to other countries, especially with the technology and this mass communication, that if something is destined for humanity and it needs to get out there, then we follow that path and we follow it through. And that's why I really am inspired by the abolitionists in the 1800s, because they were we need to follow it, immediate abolition. I don't care what you say, media is censoring us, we're going to start our own newspapers, we'll start our own communities, even some of them. They're we're going to end slavery. That's a good mentality to have. It may be very hard line, some people may not like that, but it was understanding morality to the deepest sense. These people are just like everyone else. That's it. No other justifications needed. No bunch of words put on top of that. So I really appreciate that perspective. Any thoughts on what I just said?
So I think, is that William Wilberforce who said we don't think that we'll get to free society straight away, but we ought to. We ought to get there as quickly as possible. I don't know, I've butchered that quote, but you know what I mean. And I feel the very same way about statism. People might say to me, "Oh, Graham, you shouldn't go around calling yourself an anarchist because it puts people off. You should try and be a bit more gentle and just sort of advocate for for some free market reforms here and there, but try and keep your credibility among people." And I just think that's a totally wrong-headed approach. I think I need to stand up and say, this is the ideal, this is where we want to get to. I know that there's a very long way from where we are, but I don't care. That's the destination, and I don't know exactly what the roadmap is to get there, but all I can say is, this is the end point. this is our vision, this is where we're trying to get to. Just like the abolitionists, they wanted the end of slavery immediately, but they knew it wouldn't come immediately. In the end, they knew it would be a slow process, and it's the same with me. I think the state won't be just gone overnight. It will be a slow process, but boy, I wish I could make it go away overnight. I'd push the button straight away.
Yeah, especially, with over the last years, and people start to notice acts of tyranny, and they start to realize this is why government is feared throughout many centuries, and why so many people become even more complacent, not even more rebellious necessarily, but more complacent, because they look up and say, well, oh my gosh, our government's going crazy, we need a new ruler, or oh my gosh, this policy is bad, we need a new policy, and oh, where do we look to protect our assets? But they never really question anarchy. They never look at, is a free world possible, right? They don't ever question that, and I think to some extent it's because the resources were never there for them, the education. I bet most people have never even heard of the people you mentioned, Ludwig von Mises and these guys. No one probably knows about them, but a lot more people are starting to come across them. I mean, because otherwise I wouldn't have met you and so many others, and I never expected to. But just because I was led down that path, I did. I ran into all these people, and I realized that, yes, there were people saying this stuff 200, 300 years ago. And were they listened to? No, not necessarily either. But they knew it. They saw it, and they looked toward the future as well. Like Lysander Spooner, right? For example, somebody I look up to all the time, based on his writings. And of course, I don't put anyone on the pedestal, but I look at what he said and what he did, and incredible. Starting his own post office, getting, shut down by the government post office, and then being an abolitionist, fighting on that front, and then fighting the Constitution while using it somewhat for the lawyers at the time to end slavery. Like, he was very strategic, and he knew both sides of the system, but he also knew what was needed for humanity. A lawyer to call himself an anarchist in the 1800s, I mean, very interesting.
Yeah, I think the work of the kind of 19th century anarchists and the abolitionists was very important, and it kind of, you can see it feeding into the work of 20th century philosophers like Murray Rothbard, who kind of had the advantage of Mises's economics, because Mises had kind of shown, kind of re-established economics on a firm epistemological basis, and he'd shown that markets work a lot better than the state. And Rothbard was able to combine his insights with the insights of people like Lysander Spooner and their kind of anti-constitution arguments, and kind of bring it all together and kind of synthesize it into a kind of new anarchist system, a libertarian anarchist system. So Murray Rothbard was definitely, for me, it was a very important figure in my kind of path to libertarian anarchism. And he was very complimentary of all the individualist anarchists of the 19th century.
Yeah, and as you know, for me, Mark Passio was my influence, and they both share this thing they call natural law. But the reason why I think Mark Passio also appeals to so many people is because he really drills down those moral concepts, and just makes that the pin focal focus, even without all the detail on economics and everything. That is sometimes enough alone, because so many people sometimes have to address themselves and their own internal traumas and shadows. Some people call it the shadow work, to really reevaluate their life, to recognize self-ownership. Because we realize, like, that's a step in the right direction. First of all, you need to realize you own yourself, to not, own others, or to want people in control of other people. So it's like getting to that step can be difficult in a world where it's like you're from day one, you're born into this world believing in these systems, right? And not seeing any other way out. So when we get out of the system, like you talked about education and bring that to more people's awareness, do you think voting or political action would be anywhat necessary? Because some people might think, yeah, well, why don't we still participate in elections and vote people? And what are your thoughts on that? And any other strategies to help with people's education of this knowledge?
Okay, well, I mean, trying to shrink the state from the inside is a foolish strategy, and that's never going to work. You're never going to be able to get a good guy elected and then he repeals all the laws and shrink the state that way. That's never going to work. But it would be wrong of me to dismiss politics entirely based on what I've said about Ron Paul. If it wasn't for Ron Paul, I wouldn't be here. And Ron Paul was running for president. He was playing politics. So for me to now say, you should stay away from politics, have nothing to do with it, it would be a bit hypocritical, wouldn't it? Because it's like, well, clearly there was some benefit to Ron Paul doing that. And when you listen to Ron Paul talk about this, he'll freely admit that the 20 or 30 years he spent in Congress, he basically did nothing, like made no difference to the size of the state. He didn't really stop it from growing. He certainly didn't shrink it. But what he did was started a movement. He reached people. He got hearts and minds. So he used politics as a platform. He used it as an educational platform. He's quite open. That's what he was doing. He was running an educational campaign from the Republican debate stage. He was up there telling us about the CIA blowback and the concepts like that, the gold standard, and talking about inflation tax. He was teaching us. He was like giving us a lesson in kind of how to think of these things. So if you're going to go into politics for that reason, then yes, I can say that might be beneficial, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it because I think it's a cesspool. I'm in awe of how Ron Paul was able to kind of go to all those committees and put up with all these terrible people around him all day and not be corrupted. It's really quite remarkable. So I don't think it's a very good life to get into politics. I don't think it's going to be very fulfilling or very rewarding. But if you do think it is kind of a platform for reaching people, then go for it. I don't feel like I'm in a position to say no, given my background. But generally, I think there are better ways than politics of reaching out to people. I think especially these days, people aren't really looking to politicians for their moral guidance, if they ever were. So I think you can reach people on the internet much more easily, and you don't necessarily need to go through kind of a mainstream political channel anymore. So you can reach people more directly.
Yeah, good point. So you would recommend people use sort of the internet to their advantage. Any particular resources, like when it comes to action, that you would recommend?
Well, I think the first thing before you get to action, you have to educate. Don't you? I mean, it's number one importance. I consider it my main responsibility just to educate myself. If I can educate others along the way, that's good. Right. But I think all of us, that should be our number one goal. Is educating ourselves and each other. So I tend to focus on that side of it rather than kind of direct action. I mean, I'm not opposed to kind of agorism or counter economics or anything of that nature. I fully support that. I think initiatives like the Free State Project potentially good. The idea of kind of a seceding territory sounds pretty good to me. I would kind of extend it further and hope you have kind of free counties within the Free State, and eventually you'll get to zero government. So that's a potentially good project. What else is there? I mean, there's things you can do kind of if you're a parent, get your kids out of school. Schools are kind of where a lot of these problems start. That's where the indoctrination, the conditioning happens. So that's a good form of activism as well if you're a parent.
Yeah, these are great tips. Now, when it comes to educational resources, because you're right, I mean that does come first. Is there any particular books that you would recommend for people, like if they really want to understand everything that you're talking about with solutions to this problem or that problem? I know you mentioned some books before, but are there some that you think would be really helpful for the person who's new to a lot of this information that you'd recommend for the audience?
Okay, yeah. So there's one website you should go to. It's mises.org, mises.org. And it's an educational website, and there's so much resources on there. You can spend a lifetime reading all those books, all the lectures, and it's all free. You don't have to sign up for any of it, and it's all kind of academic based, mostly economics and political philosophy. And I've spent a lot of time on that website. They have kind of daily articles as well as the kind of annual Mises University lectures, as well as conferences and things like this. So that's a really good source. I think I'd just kind of start from there, really. I mean, in any book by Ludwig von Mises or Murray Rothbard would be excellent. For a specific one, maybe For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard is very good. That was the one that kind of, for me, was quite influential, because that was the one that was really applying the economics to the areas that I hadn't seen it applied to before. So that was really important for me. So I'd look up any of the Austrian school economists or any kind of libertarians in that school of thought. What I'd recommend.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's totally awesome. I do agree. Like, the Mises website is really cool. It has tons of resources. You'll find some articles, I think, on there. I think I found some from like 1900s, like late 1900s, when a lot of that stuff was happening with Mises, when they were founded. You can still find articles that old from like 1970s, 1980s, I'm pretty sure, from the website. And they have like transcripts too of Lysander's work, Lysander Spooner, from the 1800s. So they compile a lot of great resources for people. That is a good recommendation, I would say. Do you have any animations planned, or anything that you think is something that, I don't know if you want to share, anything that you're working on that you ever need help with, or something that you are trying to pinpoint on, like you're focusing on moving forward? Now that you have all this knowledge, what do you think is the right step moving forward for yourself, and sort of leading to the next world?
Yeah, I don't have any more animations planned. I don't have fond memories of those animation days. It's not for me, a bit too tedious for me. But I certainly do have other things in the pipeline. I'm remaking my Law Without Government series. There's the audio is not very good looking back. It was sort of 10 years ago that I made it, and I think I can do a much better job now. So I'm in the process of remaking that video, trying to make it shorter and clearer and better quality all round. So that's coming. And then I also am going to start a podcast very soon. So I've recorded the first couple of episodes with my friend Richard, and we'll be putting that out by the end of the year. We'll have a few episodes to put out there. That's going to be called Unapproved Opinions. And each week it's myself and Richard Tobin will be talking about one of our many unapproved opinions, and trying to explain and justify them. We're both libertarian anarchists, and we have kind of lots of views that are kind of outside the mainstream. So this is our way of kind of putting our thoughts out there and trying to defend ourselves. So yeah, it's been really fun making it so far.
Awesome. Yeah, and if people are watching right now, it's possible that it's out right now, so be sure to check it out. When we mentioned the term anarchist, I figured I would also come to you with this question, because a lot of people will look at people that are wearing masks, on the street, burning buildings, and they're like, well, these guys call themselves anarchists, and they have the anarchy symbol, and are they really anarchists? Do you have some criticisms for those who call themselves anarchists out there?
Well, that's the caricature of an anarchist, isn't it? And I mean, look at it from the state's point of view. Of course, you're going to want to discredit anarchists. They're your enemy, aren't they? If somebody's saying that the state shouldn't exist, then the state's going to do all they can to make those people look crazy and unhinged. So yeah, you can certainly see the benefit to the state of having that image of anarchists. It's funny. I messaged a group of friends of mine the other day and I sent a picture of Murray Rothbard, and they hadn't seen him before. And there he was, an old man with a grin on his face and a bow tie. And the response came back is, it doesn't look like your typical anarchist. And I just thought that was brilliant, yeah, because the anarchist in the mind of the everyday person is throwing bombs or something. That's so true. I sent this picture of this kind of little old man with a bow tie on, and to me that is an anarchist though. It's a philosophy. It's something that you don't get to easily. You get to it through a philosophical reflection and a properly kind of thinking about things. So yeah, I'm an anarchist. I'm proud of it. I think the disconnect between kind of how I am, my sort of personality, and how I look, and then calling myself an anarchist, that kind of immediately kind of triggers people. They're like, what? How does that make sense? You know, how could someone like me call themselves an anarchist? But I think it's because I'm doing philosophy. I'm thinking about it, and I'm working out the kind of the best answers based on my own kind of judgment and my own research.
Yeah, and I've even talked to some people who maybe they grew up pretty rebellious, because some people, when they're really young, they're pretty rebellious, and they may automatically from day one, start questioning authority and going against different authority figures in their life. But they too, when they get older, they still have to recognize at some level, there needs to be a philosophical basis for why people own themselves, and why it's important to express that through sovereignty, and to what it means to work together, and stuff like that. I mean, that's something everybody has to learn one way or another, whether they're they grow up rebellious or not. For me, I was extremely obedient. I mean, people would it's like, well, is this your rebellious like stage? No, it's like this is me like finding out, wait, I've been obedient all this time to the state, to everybody, and because I thought obedience was morality. That's what I was taught in the school system. But no, it's like I have my own mind. I can think for myself. So it doesn't have to be like that. Am I really being rebellious for thinking for myself? To live my own life without coercion? I mean, is that hard to ask? So it's very interesting, and again, if anybody's new to this knowledge, I welcome the questions. I welcome the challenge. We're not not saying you're crazy. We're not saying we're superior or anything like that. It's like, if we want a philosophical conversation, which I appreciate you for having, it's like we want to really just ask the questions, and people can come to their own conclusions. We're not making anybody think a particular way or act a certain way, but guess who is? The government systems they're making you do what they want done for their own will, for their own ego. So there's a big difference there. Yeah, is there anything you have to say about that? Or
well, yeah, no, it's just really interesting to hear you say that you were particularly obedient when you were young, because I was just about to say the same thing. I was like that as well. I wasn't a rebel at all. I was very obedient. And I wonder if there is a connection there, because I think it's almost like my worldview, I kind of had total kind of faith and trust in the authorities and the experts. But then an event happened that made me realize they were wrong. And that's what caused me to throw out my whole worldview, and to suddenly not trust anyone, and suddenly not trust the experts anymore, and to think for myself. So I do wonder if there's kind of an irony there, where the most obedient people in their youth actually are more open to becoming kind of radicals in this way, because once their kind of their faith in the authorities has been shaken, they realize you have to rethink things, and you're going to have to re-establish your worldview, because what you thought before was wrong. That's I think there's a connection there. I think it's not a coincidence that I was a particularly obedient youth, and I've turned into someone who's now a rebel, I guess.
Right. I think it also. Go ahead.
So it'd just be interesting if there were like many other people in the movement that kind of feel similarly about that, or whether there's kind of a contingent of people that were kind of always rebels. I'm not really sure. I mean, you probably know more people kind of around the movement than I do, so I don't know if that's ever come up before.
Well, I don't think a lot of people always say, I was super obedient necessarily, but they'll say, I participated in this, I participated in that. I think it depends, because the childlike spirit, when we're very young, we want to question things, we want to explore, we want to be adventurous. So I think it's in all of us to some extent, right? But I would say that for me, and while I can relate to you on the obedience factor, for me, it's like, well, what if you just put your obedience somewhere else, right? I mean, think of the abolitionist, and I have a book from 1973 that a lot of people don't have, by historian Lewis Perry, and it's called Radical Abolitionism, Anarchy in the Government of God and Anti-Slavery Thought. And basically, it shows that the abolitionists were using the government of God as sort of the justification to get rid of human forms of government and human forms of authority. So if you see something higher than these man-made artificial things, you start to realize there's something that applies universally and timelessly to all human beings that is sort of like destined for us. So when I look at natural law or nature, you know, as opposed to man, I think that was the direction that led me toward perhaps a better obedience, right? And it's not really a type of obedience that we would call obedience, because I'm not being obedient to man, but I'm being obedient to truth.
Yeah.
That's that's the way, for me, how I sort of got out of that, I'll be honest.
Yeah. Okay, that is an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, because I do certainly obedient to truth would be a good way of describing how I feel as well. I do feel like truth is my guiding light. You know, that's what I seek out, because I realised that what I was brought up on was mostly lies. So kind of I hold the truth in great value. So I kind of seek it out wherever, and if somebody's saying I'm wrong about something, it deeply concerns me. You know, I don't like to think that I'm wrong about something. You know, if somebody disagrees with me, I have to research it well enough so that I know either they're wrong or I change my mind, and that's, you know, and then I've learned something as well. So yeah, definitely, there's an obedience to truth is definitely something I feel I have as well.
And that's why I encourage, you know, people to question things, because for me, like you just said, like if somebody says I'm wrong, I want to improve, and I will question myself, like, am I wrong? You know, I'm not going to be like, my first reaction is not going to be like, well, I'm right. What are you talking about? Like, no, I'm gonna sit down with myself and I'm like, am I wrong? And I ask myself that all the time. I still constantly reflect, like, am I wrong? And it's not to doubt myself. It's to question, like, is there room for improvement? Is there something I'm not seeing that I still need to see? And with economics and how things will get done, I think there's always something to see. It's like, because there's a whole world potential of future out there with freedom. You know, there's so many things you can do with freedom, and I think that's the beauty of it. The fact that there isn't one way of handling scenarios, or there isn't one way of people finding the truth. There isn't one way of, you know, anarchism. I mean, it's sort of artistry, and I also think that's also a cool perspective. I've talked to people who are musicians, and there's a lot of people who produce music who are very passionate about it in this movement, may you say, that care about freedom. And that's another way it gets to them. They listen to music and has sometimes these really powerful lyrics, and they find it through there, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the kind of the artistic side, I think, is really important. Yeah, to have musicians and artists associated with the kind of the truth side of things is really good. Yeah, to counter all these kind of establishment, you know, not let them dominate the arts. I think that's it's part of the fight.
Yeah. All right, so we're reaching about the hour point now, and is there any extra resources or anything else you'd like to mention you feel like we haven't yet covered that you want to share with the audience before we go?
Well, no, I think we've covered my channel, Man Against the State, and my new podcast, Unapproved Opinions. That'll be at unapprovedopinions.uk, which isn't live yet, but it will be live in the next couple of months. So hopefully by the time this goes up, your viewers will be able to check out some of my unapproved opinions and watch some of my videos there.
Awesome. Hey, man, keep up the great work. I love your channel. I was always thinking about reposting your videos. I got your permission to repost the one about libertarians being abolitionists, because that's a term that I sort of brought back for my own personal use, because I just think it's important to look at the morality of things. And, you know, I also use the word anarchist here and there. You know, it depends. I like using both to show, like, this is a connection that could be made, as some of the abolitionists did themselves. So, you know, you look up online, they'll call themselves no governmentists, you know, like the other ways of saying it. I was like, okay, that's interesting. But yeah, I appreciate your works and everything you're doing, and your audiobooks too are really cool in detail, and you have a great voice. I hope you continue doing what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing more content. I recommend everybody checking it out. managainstthestate.com, managainstthestate.com, and again, you can find a lot of his stuff on YouTube and Odyssey. It's also just Man Against the State. Thank you, Graham, for joining me, and everybody for watching. If you want to see a lot more speakers like this and also get a ton of resources for free, you can go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Good stuff. Yeah, Graham is awesome. Definitely recommend checking out his channel, but we will be watching one of his animations today. And it's a 4-part animation. He mentioned in the talk, if you were paying attention, he said that he was going to remake his Law Without Government video. Well, he did. So we're going to feature that here shortly. In fact, actually, it might be coming up really soon. Let me check. But yeah, it's a great video. And I've seen it before, but I have not seen this revision actually, and it's beautiful. It actually really helps make things even more concise and more clear to the point for when you talk to other people. And so again, it's called Law Without Government, and it goes over different aspects of how the world would operate. And this just gives you a little bit of imagination, right? A little bit of free flow of ideas because it's not necessarily that you need to know every single talking point. Like someone says, well, how would you get this done? How would you get that done? It's not that you have to come out with like this PR response of, oh, well, it's this and what it's that and it's this. But if somebody's genuinely curious, which happens later on, usually after the moral arguments, this comes of great help, right? Because they're going to have some sort of curiosity along the way. And this really helps put it into perspective. But yeah, I really like that talk as well. I agree. All right, so that is actually listed as my last video to show for you guys. First, we have a video that will actually sum up everything. And it is by Eric Dubay. Now, some of you guys might know who Eric Dubay is, but he puts out a bunch of content of all sorts of different kinds on all sorts of different topics. He did one on government, and he is not somebody who usually does interviews. I reached out to him. He reached out back to me. He said he doesn't usually do interviews, and he if he does, it's like very, very rarely. He doesn't do debates or anything like that. He just likes to produce content, and most of all of his stuff is really well researched. You know, he's got sources for everything, and people can ultimately make up their own minds because he's got content on some of the most controversial subjects in our day and age. But he's done it for years and years and years. So if you don't know who Eric Dubay is, I would recommend checking out his work. Especially since he is well connected with his community. The fact that I'm able to reach out to him is a good sign. Because there's a lot of people in independent media who I try to reach out to and I get nothing, right? Obviously, I managed to get some really great people on the summit. Very fortunate for that. And that, to me, also increases their credibility in my own book. I'm going to have some bias, of course. But nonetheless, I will say that Eric Dubay seems pretty legit, just from looking at all his stuff and how communicative he has been. When I was learning a lot of his content and very new to it, he would basically comment along the way, responding. So here we go. His video, The Problem with Governments. That's what it's titled. And you can look it up. A lot of people reposted this video, so I think this one is also a repost because the original got transformed into a bunch of different types across other channels, and I didn't want to sponsor other people. I want it to be just the original video. So here it is. Also, a lot of his stuff can get banned across different platforms, so here we go. There it is.
All governments.
All right, let me just make it a little bigger. Yeah, he's got a lot of visuals in the video as well, like graphics, so you can watch it as well.
Are immoral and criminal institutions because they force everyone under threat of violence to pay mandatory taxes for life. There are hundreds of taxes, from property tax to income tax to inheritance tax. You must pay them all, or else the government will use the power and force of its machinery to seize your bank account, garnish your wages, and/or arrest you and put you in jail. How is that any different than the mafia? Governments demand we pay our dues regularly, promise us we'll be safe and protected if we do, and if we don't, agents come around to shake us down or put us away. If taxes were voluntary, then governments wouldn't automatically be immoral or criminal because they would be completely funded by donation only, thus their very existence limited by voluntarism. If governments actually did a good job and spent our money wisely, then people might willingly donate for social programs, roads, schools, etc. But when taxes are compulsory, and a huge percentage of them goes towards lining the pockets of politicians, I can't help but think privatization of social programs, road construction, schools, and everything else the government unsatisfactorily provides us would be better for society by letting the free market and small communities and neighborhoods decide instead of our immoral criminal governments. Another mandatory tax and despicable limitation that all governments enforce is our natural right to international travel. In reality, the world is one undivided whole. All divisions, such as countries and borders, are merely man-made thought constructs with no reality outside our minds. They are just arbitrary lines drawn on a map that governments are constantly changing. But everyone has to be born somewhere, so governments quickly brand you with the curse of nationality the instant you are born. Now I am American because I was born within the arbitrary borders of the fictional construct known as America. Since I'm American, but I've made the decision to live outside the arbitrary borders of the fictional construct I was born in, Thailand, I have a whole new series of taxes and government mandates that apply. I am required to carry around an expensive microchipped passport identification and check in with the immigration office every 3 months to fill out some paperwork and give them more money. Every 6 months to a year, I'm required to cross the arbitrary borders of the fictional construct known as Thailand into a neighboring tax farm's embassy, where I must fill out more paperwork and give them yet more money for temporary visa stamps in my passport. To work abroad, governments require us slaves to submit work permits and pay annually for the privilege. The taxes and headaches never end. Thanks to being American, I'm actually lucky that I can live abroad at all, and should be happy. Many people from less fortunate tax farms are completely restricted from traveling to or working in other more fortunate tax farms. Another one is land rights. How can you honestly claim to be a landowner when you have to pay property taxes every year for as long as you own it? If you own it, why do you still have to pay annual rental fees? The government holds the allodial titles and just issues you a slave deed. They maintain eminent domain and can plow over your home to build a highway anytime they please. Name one thing that governments provide that people couldn't do better, easier, and more efficiently privately at the community level. Name one reason why we have to run this never-ending hamster wheel of government mandate and taxation. There is nowhere on earth you can go that isn't controlled by a statist government. Every piece of land has been divided up and claimed by 196 nations, all of which are controlled by some form of forced governance. There is nowhere left on earth that sovereign, freedom-loving individuals can go live freely without a mafioso government forcing them to pay taxes and obey laws. No matter whether you live under a monarchy, an oligarchy, or a republic, whether it's called democracy, communism, socialism, or fascism, all current forms of government initiate and mandate violence and slavery upon their populations. We are all slaves to our governments because every nation forces under threat of violence and kidnapping that we must pay them a percentage of our income. In some countries, like Thailand, it's around 30%. America, 40 to 50%. France is around 60%. Not to mention hundreds of other smaller mandatory taxes which raise these figures even higher. So if the definition of slavery is forcefully taking 100% of someone's income, what is it called when governments forcefully take 60% of someone's income? Is that not slavery? What if they only take 30%? Is that still slavery? We are taught in school that slavery ended long ago, and it is universally understood that slavery is immoral. But if governments still are forcibly taking even 1% of their population's income, that is still slavery, and even 1% slavery is immoral. The very definition of the word government is mind control, and the vast majority of people worldwide, public and private sector alike, are absolutely mind controlled by their governments, medias, and education systems to believe that their statist government is a moral and altruistic institution that exists for the benefit of the people. The reality is, of course, the opposite. The reality is that all nations are like open-air slave plantations, allowing their indentured servant populations to choose their occupation, giving the illusion of freedom, then swooping in on payday to steal the fruits of your labor. This is why all governments are criminal and immoral, and why the only system of just governance is anarchism, agorism, or voluntarism. There is no political solution to the problem of government. Voting for a new ceremonial figurehead every 4 years has never, will never, and could never create any significant, lasting, positive change because governments cannot be improved or made moral from within. There are too many vested interests, and no statist system, be it monarchy, oligarchy, communism, democracy, republic, or dictatorship, none of them respect the right of the individual to opt out of being governed. When the mafia comes around to your business, they always befriend and promise to protect you, providing you pay and obey them. If you refuse to comply, however, the mafia burns your business to the ground. Similarly, all statist governments promise to help and protect their populations as long as we pay and obey. But if we don't, then they seize our asses and our assets and throw us in prison. The whole problem is giving one privileged class the legal right and obligation to commit violence and coercion against the rest of the population. All governments around the world initiate the use of violence in the form of police and coercion in the form of taxes against their populations, and this is absolutely immoral and unacceptable. Consensual sex is moral because it is voluntary, whereas rape is immoral because it's forced. Similarly, things like charity donations in the free market are moral because they are voluntary, whereas theft and taxation are immoral because they are forced. The root problem festering within all governments around the world is not the rife internal corruption or criminality. Those are merely symptoms and side effects of statism. The paramount problem with government is that its mandates are mandatory, its compulsions are compulsory. For governments to be moral institutions, all taxes and interactions must be made voluntary. If governments are honestly in existence for our benefit, then they must be voluntary and never initiate the use of force against their populations. That kind of authoritarian violence and coercion is not allowed or acceptable in any other facet of our lives. We wouldn't put up with it. So why do we sheepishly line up to vote for a new puppet president every 4 years, thinking they are somehow going to make the mafia moral? Simply working for the government, whether you're a soldier, policeman, politician, or otherwise, your salary comes from the taxes the population are forced to pay, making you a criminal by proxy. Thus, working for statist governments, like working for the mafia, is immoral and criminal because your paycheck comes from stolen money. In other words, all governments, everyone working for them and benefiting from their social programs, are like getaway drivers in a robbery. They may not have personally stolen your money, but your money is right there in their pockets, so who is responsible if not them? I'm not a fan of isms, but the second you express a sound idea, the establishment is quick to rebrand your revolution and assimilate your inspiration into an ism they can control. For instance, anarchy, a once respectable term simply meaning without rulers, advocating society without government, has long been rebranded hand in hand with chaos, wearing bandana face masks, throwing Molotov cocktails. The actual idea of non-violent sovereign societies, enlightened and capable beyond the need for statist governments, however, is certainly ideal, and not chaos. The terms agorism and voluntarism are similar ideas advocating only voluntary interactions between people and the state. Call it what you will, anarchism, agorism, voluntarism, or just keep it simple and call it freedom. It is the missing ingredient in all governments and the root of all state corruption and criminality. If people want to have a bureaucracy of diplomats creating a bunch of social programs for their benefit, what governments claim to be, then that's fine. But just because some guy in a suit wrote something on a piece of paper doesn't make it mandatory, and just because the mafia says you'd better pay up doesn't mean you should. Our current so-called justice system is such an unenlightened, corrupt farce that the entire edifice should be relegated to the history books. Humanity desperately needs to reconsider the idea that justice is somehow served by systematically fining, caging, or killing criminals, the idea that we should pay and empower unaffected parties to deliver standardized punishments, and the idea that police are anything but violent and coercive policy enforcers of our statist mafia governments. Today there are literally millions of laws and legislations on record in the United States alone, and under the current official edict, ignorance of these laws is no excuse for disobeying. Therefore, all citizens are legally bound, under threat of theft, kidnapping, and imprisonment, to read, remember, understand, and obey millions of ever-increasing laws, or else millions of nitpicking restrictions our nagging nanny state has decided us children must completely refrain from under any circumstance, or else receive severe punishment. Ridiculous things with no ill-affected party, such as the consumption of cannabis, a naturally growing plant that governments all over the world have deemed evil enough to cage you in prison for decades should you dare allow the weed's demon seed to take root in your soil. Such laws are nothing but anti-freedoms written by people so far above the law that they can write the laws. But surely we need some form of law and order, court system, and police protection, everyone cries out in knee-jerk unison. Here is all we need. Common law courts which settle lawful disputes between two affected parties regarding matters of injury, theft, or breach of contract. That is all. No state agents, district attorneys, or police enforcing statutes and codes, no maritime admiralty or other kangaroo courts. The only disputes which require the kind of mediation provided by courts and judges are those between two affected parties in the case of harm to one's person or property, theft, or breach of contract, the holy trinity of common law. Everything which requires court mediation falls within these three simple categories, and anything beyond or outside these categories are victimless crimes involving no injured party and have no business being called law. By eliminating these millions of laws and leaving only 3 would so drastically reduce the amount of court cases per district per year that they could be run very cheaply in a voluntarist society. Eliminating these millions of laws would also reduce the amount of people in prison by over 90%. America currently houses 25% of the world's prisoners, yet Americans themselves account for only 5% of the world population. Over 2 million in a population of 300 million, meaning almost 1% of the entire US population is currently living in cages, and over 90% of these for victimless crimes. The insane way these people are being treated is disgusting, and society has turned a collective blind eye to their plight. Meanwhile, the injustice system also goes to great lengths protecting truly evil people from receiving what they deserve. Recently in Thailand, a man shot and killed his wife point blank for ignoring him and chatting on Line Messenger too often. He then proceeded to kill his mother-in-law, and when his son came to investigate, he shot him too. He then fired another round in all of them to make sure they were dead. When his daughter came home, he contemplated killing her, but after much begging and pleading decided to spare her life and instead just stole her gold necklace to help finance his escape. When police finally caught him, they forced him to do a reenactment of the entire murder at the scene of the crime, as they always do here in Thailand, and 200 angry neighbors stormed in to try to hang him to death. It took 50 police officers to stop the 200 villagers from doing what all of them deemed just and necessary, which is banding together to end the life of this heartless psychopath who killed 3 members of their village. Had these 50 police state agents not been there to protect this murderer of innocent women and children from his enraged community, this spontaneously formed jury of 200 of his peers surely would have hung him or beat him to death. In a natural tribal society, that is certainly what would have happened. His community would have collectively decided his fate based on each member's willingness to forgive or to engage in some act or form of retribution. Now, instead, he will be taken through the modern criminal justice system, which means rather than being hung or stomped to death by his legitimately livid peers, he is protected and caged by government mafia thugs, while all affected parties are dragged through years of appeals, draining everyone's savings, waiting for the final judgment of some Freemason in a white powder wig and black dress, banging a wooden hammer, yammering on about order and honor. The entire thing is a corrupt farce, as for example, in the case of 8 and 9-year-old satanic ritual abuse victims Gabrielle and Alyssa Dearman. They are being raped and kidnapped by the very state police and social service workers who are supposed to be protecting them and pursuing justice. How can justice ever be served when the courts, lawyers, judges, and police are more corrupt than the average street criminals on trial? As I wrote in my book Asbestos, laws leave crime victims powerless to right their own wrongs the way they see fit, and instead pay and empower unaffected people to enforce standardized punishments. If someone lies to, steals from, cheats, kidnaps, rapes, or murders someone I know, then me, my friends, and my family deserve to deliver the punishment. Not only that, but in these intense situations, me, my friends, and my family do not want to sit still and wait for cops to do the best they can with what the law provides. We're going to do the best we can with what God provides and use our God-given freedom to enforce our own ethics, whether it's retribution or forgiveness. Justice should be whatever just us decide. Suppose I watch you kill my daughter. The law says for me to leave you be, call the police, collect evidence, consult a lawyer, then testify to a box of peers who will hopefully lock you away through years of appeals until finally you get the death penalty or die of old age. If instead I do the natural thing in such a situation and kill you myself, then it's your daughter's turn to collect evidence, consult the lawyer, testify to a box of peers, who'll keep me in and out of appeals, each one feeding the system, paying police and judicial employee paychecks, greasing those greedy wheels of statist justice with years of our grief, just for doing the just thing. Furthermore, suppose I watch you kill my daughter, and instead of wishing you dead, instead of pursuing retribution of some sort, suppose I wish to take the highest moral ground and end the cycle of suffering, to stop the continuation of evil with my unconditional forgiveness. Suppose I wish to pardon you from all punishment. I wish you no harm, and that your family need not grieve the way ours does. If after all this I actually wish for your forgiveness, we'll find it's against the law. I have to destroy evidence, consult a lawyer, then testify to a box of peers that it's all insanity, forgive those umpteen sardines, and send them home. We love everybody and we're so sorry. Please love us and leave us alone. Stop locking us up in courtrooms and let us determine our own misdemeanors, or at least give us forgiveness as an option. It is important to note, governments, just like countries, borders, laws, and other abstract concepts, do not actually exist. It sure seems like governments exist since they have the power to murder, steal from, or imprison their populations for whatever whims tickle their fancy, but in actual fact, they do not exist. Only people exist. People in fitted uniforms exist. Police, soldiers, politicians, prison guards, public school teachers, and welfare recipients exist. The people who work for and benefit from the system are the system. Without people willing to murder, steal from, or imprison their fellow brothers and sisters in the name of government, there is no government. What government would we have if no one showed up on election day? Who would shake us down if no one paid up on tax day? Who would brainwash our children if no one sent them to public schools? Who would fight foreign wars if no one would be a soldier? If people stopped working for the government would cease to exist. If people stopped voting, if people stopped paying taxes, the government would cease to exist. Police, soldiers, politicians, all other government workers and welfare recipients are the beneficiaries of our stolen money. They are all upstanding, parasite citizens employed by a parasite system to parasite off everyone else. They are all anti-entrepreneurs, actively working against the free market. They are people who, through their actions, agree with, enable, and enforce violence and coercion against their fellow man. They grant themselves the legal right to counterfeit their own currency and imprison anyone else who tries. Their paychecks come from the taxes we are all forced to pay them. Their means of subsistence is counterfeit and theft. And these thieves have the power to put us in prison if we don't willingly hand over our hard-earned money, whenever and however much they ask for. Governmental literally translates to mind control. It's time people realize they've been brainwashed by their mafia governments. Stand up and say to all government employees a big no thanks for your service. To all the soldiers and policemen, to all politicians and government employees around the world, consider this a big no thanks for your service. Your paychecks all come from money stolen by force from your hardworking fellow countrymen and women. Your employer, your national government, is 100% funded by tax money, taxes which your populations are forced to pay under threat of kidnapping, imprisonment, and often murder. To be employed by an immoral and criminal organization like a statist government is immoral and criminal. To receive stolen money and call it your salary is immoral and criminal. I implore all government workers to leave your jobs and pursue an occupation with real integrity. Find a way to earn money without stealing from everyone. Get a job where customers pay you voluntarily. I know it's not as easy as just forcing people to pay your salaries, but it is the moral thing to do. And to everyone else, let your soldiers, police, and politicians know, no thanks for your service, and no, we don't support the troops. We don't support any occupation built on stolen money, much less an occupation built on the blood of millions of innocents. We send young men and women off to kill and be killed, maim and be maimed, all for the propagation of corporate imperialism and statist hegemony. Then, if and when they ever come home, demoralized and depressed, ridden with regret and post-traumatic stress, we herald them as heroes. But the truth is, every time a soldier leaves his home country, he becomes a terrorist. If you're interested in defending your country and protecting your family for free, join a local militia. If you're interested in leaving your country to attack other people's families for money, join the national military. The former is respectable, the latter is irreputable.
Law without government. How could that work?
Yeah, so it's a great video. I'm glad to share that with you guys. Yeah, it goes into everything. And for those of you who are just coming on by, would recommend that was Eric Dubay in his video, The Problem with Government. Now, this animation, this next one, is going to be the final video for tonight. And this is going to sum up a lot of what we've talked about with, all about government and its functions, but also what about without, right? So now that you got sort of the bad news, let's look at the good news. What is the solutions, or what are some of the solutions that could be used in a free world, right? Keep in mind, there is no one solution. There's no one way to handle things. Just remember that. So this will give, however, a general outline and allow many different people to utilize this outline in a free world. He told me in the interview, if you remember, Graham Wright, who created this next animation, that somebody who is a communist or somebody who's a capitalist or whatever, what have you, can all still utilize this basic outline of getting together. Because guess what? As long as it doesn't involve violence, it's voluntary. It's not a government. So let's get started. This is the final video for tonight, and I thank you guys for joining me, Mandatory, Myocarditis, Shine, and others who are out there. I know you're watching on Twitch and YouTube together. Thank you. Let's get going.
To explain it, I'll start with definitions and principles, then look at a practical example of how a crime is dealt with in a society with law but without government, then end by talking about how laws emerge through a market process in the absence of government, and what kind of laws we could expect from a society with law but without government. Let's start by defining law. Laws are property rules that emerge from the resolution of conflicts. Two facts about the world explain why laws exist: scarcity of resources and diversity of interests between individuals. These two facts mean there is always a potential for interpersonal conflicts about resource usage. Take an apple. If two people both want to eat it and not share it, they cannot both be satisfied. For conflict avoidance, we need property rules to establish who has the ownership right over the apple. That is, who has the right to decide how the apple is used. The production of these property rules, or laws, is the law industry. Laws emerge from the services provided by arbitrators asked for their opinion to help resolve a conflict. Now let's define government, which I'm using here interchangeably with the word state. Government is a territorial monopolist over law. It is the sole provider of law, the ultimate decision-maker and arbitrator within a territory. Monopolies can only be maintained using force, and this is how a government operates. It uses its monopoly of law to exempt itself from rules about the use of force. For example, they declare that stealing is legal when they do it, and they call it taxation. So in the field of law, just like every other industry, you can have competition or you can have monopoly. When you have monopoly, that's government. When you have competition, that's anarchy. Now let's see this in action, starting with the simplest possible society. Two people on a desert island, Adam and Ben. They could either live in isolation from each other, or they could interact. The interaction could be violent, such as one man killing or enslaving the other, but is more likely to be peaceful, as both men will see the benefit in peaceful interactions, such as friendship, joint projects, or trade. Let's suppose they live peacefully, but now they have a conflict. Adam picks some apples from a tree that Ben considers his own. Ben tells Adam to go and find his own apple tree, or offers to trade him some apples. Adam replies that Ben has no legitimate claim to own the tree, so he did nothing wrong by picking some apples off it. They have a falling out. With no one else on the island, Adam and Ben have no one they can turn to for help resolving this conflict. Maybe they will have a physical fight about it, or maybe they will just leave each other alone going forward. But now suppose a third individual is on the island, Charlie. Now there is a new possibility. Ask Charlie for his opinion and agree to whatever resolution he suggests. This is third-party dispute resolution. Adam and Ben both make their cases to Charlie. Charlie must decide who he believes has the stronger claim to the apple tree, and then suggest a resolution that he feels will serve justice and maintain peaceful relations on the island. Charlie might decide Ben rightfully owns the tree, so Adam should give back the apples and apologise, and maybe make amends for his theft by giving Ben some compensation. Or Charlie might decide no one owns the tree, so apples can be freely picked from it, so Adam gets to keep his apples and Ben is in the wrong for preventing Adam from picking the apples. Or maybe Charlie will find a compromise between the two positions, so Adam gets to keep the apples that he already picked, but is not allowed to pick any more. Whatever Charlie decides, one party is going to be disappointed, but still has the strong incentive to accept the decision for the sake of continued peaceful interactions. In rendering his opinion about ownership of a disputed property, Charlie has produced a law. The island now has its first law. That tree is Ben's, or that tree is freely available for anyone to pick apples from, whatever Charlie decided. Now suppose later Adam has a dispute with Charlie about some fish. If they cannot resolve it themselves, they may ask Ben for his opinion. The same process happens, so now Ben has produced a law about fish. And then when Ben and Charlie have a dispute, they may ask Adam to produce a law for them. Here we have a society with law, but without government. There are laws, but there is no monopolist producing them. Everyone is of equal status with respect to the laws. What would a monopoly of the production of law be like on our island? Let's suppose that after producing a law for Adam and Ben, Charlie decided he wants to be the monopolist of law. So when he gets into a dispute with Adam over some fish, he refuses to take it to Ben. Charlie says that he is the only person who produces laws on this island, so he is going to arbitrate on his own case. Unsurprisingly, Charlie makes a law that says he gets to keep the fish. If Adam and Ben accept this situation, then Charlie is now a government. He is the final decision maker in all disputes, even the ones he is involved in. Now we no longer have a society where everyone is of equal status with respect to the laws. We have a ruler who is above the law because he makes all the laws, and everyone else is ruled. It is a master-slave relationship between the ruler and the ruled. Adam and Ben are no longer free. Why would Adam and Ben accept this situation? Isn't it obvious Charlie is just a tyrant, a scoundrel, a bully? They may begrudgingly accept the situation because they fear the use of force from Charlie. But even better from Charlie's perspective would be if he can convince them that a ruler is necessary for social order, and that he is their rightful ruler. Because he is outnumbered, this kind of propaganda is necessary for Charlie to maintain his position as a monopolist of law. So, any society which has 3 or more people can have laws. Those laws can be produced freely by anyone. We call that a stateless or free society. Or those laws can be produced by a monopolist, a government, a bully that has taken over society. Let us do one more thought experiment on our desert island. But this time there are 11 people in the society. Two of them have a dispute about some coconuts. They need a third party to help them. Now there are 9 people they can choose from. They could take their dispute to any of them. On what basis will they choose somebody? The most important requirement is that it must be someone impartial. There is no point taking a dispute to someone who is obviously going to favour one party over the other, like a family member. Other qualities would be that they have a reputation for being fair, honest, and wise. The disputants want a serious opinion that they can respect. As the population grows and the division of labour intensifies, some individuals who possess these qualities may find that they can make a living purely by providing third-party dispute resolution services. They will be professional arbitrators. They may create firms selling these services. Their customers will be disputants who need help resolving a conflict. Their income will depend on their reputation for making wise and fair decisions. These arbitrators and law providers are not rulers. None of them is in a privileged position. If someone has a dispute with an arbitrator, that dispute is taken to a different arbitrator. If one of the arbitrators started to abuse his position by ruling on a case involving himself or taking a bribe, his power is quickly checked by his competitors, the other arbitrators. Any of them would happily rehear the case and make an unbiased ruling on it. Once the wannabe tyrant arbitrator has been exposed, he loses his reputation and his livelihood. It is the best imaginable system of checks and balances on power. Now we move into part 2 of the video. We've discussed definitions and principles. Now we're going to leave the desert island and consider the real, modern, complex world. Whenever an industry has been under the control of a monopoly for a long time, it becomes hard to imagine how it could be done differently by freely competing firms. We currently live in a world of governments, monopolists of law, out-of-control arbitrators making laws in conflicts involving themselves. The principles we discussed of equality under the law and competition between providers may all sound good, and it may work on a small scale, but what would that be like in practice, in the real world? To explain it, I'm going to take the perspective of an ordinary person living in a hypothetical world with laws but without government. Meet Alice. Alice pays a monthly subscription to a company called Dawn Defense, a protection agency. In return, if Alice ever becomes a victim of a crime, all she needs to do is contact Dawn Defense for assistance. Let's say that Alice becomes a victim of a crime. Some money is stolen from her. At the earliest opportunity, she calls the emergency number supplied by Dawn Defense. If she is in danger, security agents will be sent to her immediately. Alice describes the events, the attacker, and her losses to Dawn Defense investigators. Dawn Defense quickly pays out suitable compensation to Alice. Alice has chosen Dawn Defense because they are a reputable provider of these services. They are known to respond very quickly in emergencies, to take care of their customers in difficult circumstances, to pay out quickly and generously when one of their customers becomes a victim of a crime, and to effectively pursue justice on behalf of their customers. Alice cares about all these things. Companies like Dawn Defense exist to serve the demands we all have for security, law, and justice. These companies suffer financially when one of their customers is a victim of a crime. They have a strong incentive to identify and catch the criminal, to satisfy demands for justice, and to recover their cost of having to pay compensation to Alice. Dawn Defense employs skilled detectives to identify criminals. They conclude that Bill was the thief. They issue him a fine. Pay up or force will be used to make you pay up. Bill could admit his guilt and accept his punishment, or he could protest his innocence. Dawn Defense takes great care to not use force against innocent people, so it will take Bill's claims of innocence seriously. They need to be sure they have the right person. Let's take the simplest case first. Bill's arguments are unconvincing. He is obviously guilty, and no one is willing to defend him. If he still refuses to pay, Dawn Defense will go ahead and use minimal force against Bill. Acting as agents of Alice the victim, this use of force is retaliatory, not aggressive. But let's suppose it's not so clear-cut. Bill subscribes to his own protection agency called Tanner Justice, a competitor of Dawn Defence. As soon as Bill gets accused of a crime, he's on the phone to Tanner Justice, telling them that he is innocent and being unjustly accused and threatened with force by Dawn Defence. Tanner Justice calls Dawn Defence to see what evidence they have. They conduct their own investigation to see whether their customer is truly being unjustly threatened with force here because he is innocent, or is being justly threatened with force because he is guilty. If Tanner Justice conclude Bill is guilty as well, they will back down and advise him to pay up. Then we're back to the previous situation with no one to defend Bill. If Tanner Justice conclude Bill is innocent, they will defend him. They will consider the threats made by Dawn Defence to be aggression against their customer, rather than retaliation on behalf of Alice. In this situation, the two protection agencies need to find some peaceful resolution to this conflict. So they will ask the opinion of a third party. Naturally, there are firms in the market that provide this service of helping to resolve conflicts between the protection agencies. These are the court agencies. Dawn Defence and Tanner Justice will have a prior agreement about which court to use. Let's say they agree to go to a court agency called Benson Enterprises. This firm will examine the evidence and arguments expertly presented by the two sides. They will offer their opinion. If the court opines that Bill is guilty, Tanner Justice will back down. If the court opines that Bill is innocent, then Dawn Defence will be made to apologise to Bill, cancel the fine, and pay him compensation for the false accusation and threat. And that is how crime is dealt with in a society with law but without government. The difference between this and government is competition versus monopoly. Here there is competition at all levels, impelling excellence, delivering value for customers. The court agencies compete over how well they resolve disputes between protection agencies. Above all, they must maintain their reputation for being impartial, honest, fair and wise. They are being paid to offer a just opinion. Any court can retry a case, and if an injustice is revealed, the responsible court will be shunned by the protection agencies, whether it is due to incompetence or corruption. Each court serves as a check and balance on the power of all the competing courts. The protection agencies compete to provide for their customers the best all-round protection service. It will be insurance-based, and the protection agencies will compete on all aspects of the package deal they provide, including home security, self-defense, guards, emergency services, investigators, internal courts, lawyers, debt collectors, and law enforcers. In this story, the two protection agencies performed several distinct functions in-house, but these functions may well be outsourced to specialized firms. The market will find the optimal way of structuring the industry. Then there are the watchdogs providing consumer advice, auditors checking due process is followed, and the media, all competing for a hint of corruption or incompetence by the protection agencies or courts, forcing them to be consistent and transparent. It is all oriented to satisfying the consumer demand for security, law, and justice. Just like every industry where there is free market competition, what gets demanded is what gets produced. Through competition between court agencies in a stateless society, laws emerge. Now we're going to part 3 of this video, where I'll go more in depth on the market process of how laws emerge in a stateless society, the economics of the law industry, the mechanism by which consumer demands for laws will be translated into the laws that are provided by the protection agencies. The conflict we looked at between Alice and Bill and their respective protection agencies was a disagreement about circumstances, the identity of the thief, what events really took place. They disagreed on whether Bill was the guilty person, so they used a third party to help them resolve it. What they both agreed upon was that theft is a crime, that whoever committed theft against Alice should be brought to justice, and that the amount of the fine was a just punishment. They agreed on all the principles involved. They only disagreed about the circumstances. So now let's take the opposite example, where both sides fully agree on the circumstances, but the disagreement is about a principle. To make the example as extreme as possible, let's say the disagreement is about whether capital punishment is suitable for murderers. Bill murdered Alice. Neither protection agency disputes this fact. This dispute is not about what is true, but what is just. The disagreement is that Dawn Defense is in favour of the death penalty for murderers, while Tanner Justice is opposed. There can be no compromise here. A third-party opinion is of no use. The protection agencies are not going to be able to agree on a court to approach. Dawn Defense has advertised itself as pro-capital punishment. It has promised its customers that it will seek the death penalty against anyone guilty of murder. They could potentially lose lots of customers if Bill, the murderer of Alice, their customer, is not executed. Tanner Justice is anti-capital punishment. It has promised its customers it will seek to protect them, even when they are guilty of murder, against anyone who threatens them with the death penalty. They could potentially lose lots of customers if they cannot prevent Bill from being executed. This kind of dispute gets resolved by a stand-down payment being made from one firm to the other. The direction and size of the stand-down payment depends on the bargaining power of the two firms. Here's a numeric example of how these stand-down payments work. Suppose Dawn Defense estimates that if it backs down in this case, it will lose $1 million worth of revenue from customers who abandon them because they cannot deliver on their pro-death penalty position. This means they will be willing to pay up to $1 million to ensure that Bill gets the death penalty, so that they would hold on to those customers. Tanner Justice similarly estimates how many customers they would lose by backing down. They estimate it will lose them $500,000 in revenue, so they would be willing to pay up to $500,000 to stop the execution. So the two sides come to an agreement. Dawn Defense offers to pay $800,000 to Tanner Justice if they will stand down in this case and allow them to execute Bill. Tanner Justice accepts the offer, because if their estimates are correct, they gain $300,000 from the deal. Dawn Defense is better off by $200,000 from retaining those customers. As with any voluntary trade, both parties benefit from this agreement. Consumers as a group benefit too, because they were willing to pay $1 million for Bill to be executed, but only willing to pay $500,000 for him to avoid execution. The reason Dawn pays Tanner, and not the other way round, is that Dawn had more to lose by not getting their way. In this hypothetical, capital punishment for murderers is the more popular viewpoint. Since Dawn and Tanner are both reputable firms in a mature market, they do not negotiate these stand-down agreements case by case. They have standing agreements about how to handle each situation and regular stand-down payments. This way everyone knows what will happen in advance and consumers can make an informed choice. Tanner openly declares that while it will not enforce the death penalty itself, they will also not be able to defend their customers from the death penalty if they murder a customer of Dawn Defense. For another type of crime, Dawn and Tanner may have a different stand-down agreement. Perhaps Dawn Defense is in favour of corporal punishment against violent offenders, while Tanner thinks imprisonment is a more suitable punishment. Maybe the majority in this case agree with Tanner, so Tanner makes a regular payment to Dawn, so that the Tanner way is upheld. Dawn Defense customers who support corporal punishment will have to settle for knowing that it will not be used if the violent offender is protected by Tanner. The pattern of payments between these two firms could be complex if they have many disagreements with each other about crime and punishment principles. And there will not just be two protection agencies in society, but many. Each pair of agencies will have a set of stand-down agreements with each other for any principled disagreements. Agencies that have the same policy as each other can pool their resources to secure beneficial agreements with the protection agencies they have a mutual disagreement with. For example, all the anti-capital punishment agencies could bid as a group against all the pro-capital punishment agencies for an agreement that capital punishment will not be used against their customers. So this is how consumer demand for laws ultimately determines the laws enforced in a stateless society. It is a market process, the products of which are superior to products of the political process. So we can expect laws that emerge from this market process to be superior to laws produced by governments. We can make predictions about what would be illegal in a stateless society by asking, are people going to be willing to pay for that law to be enforced? A drug or gun prohibition law may sound appealing when the costs are spread across all taxpayers, but will be less so when the costs are borne only by the individuals who choose to pay for it. A protection agency trying to enforce a prohibition law would have to charge customers significantly more to cover the cost of enforcing the law. Principally, the cost of attaining stand-down agreements with the competing protection agencies that promise to protect gun owners and drug owners from violations. My prediction is that most people will consider only libertarian laws to be good value for money in the marketplace for laws. This is how law without government will tend towards libertarianism.
Awesome. Yeah, that's and that's just one example of so many of the people who have come together to look at the free world and how many solutions there would be. There is countless amount of resources on that. But what real work needs to be done in the real world is mostly moral education. Because while all the economic education is already out there, because people have spent so much time on it thinking that that's what they should spend time on, the moral education is always the forefront. But it's still good to be aware of the economic side of things, for sure. And thank you, Shine, for hanging out. Thank you, Mandatory, for hanging out as well. I thank you guys very much, because I'm going to end the stream. But I appreciate you guys for hanging out and all that jazz. We played a good amount of videos today, and if you want to see a lot more, don't forget downloadable resources on day 7. Okay, we just played day 7 resources. Okay, even though now it's day 8 where I am. And I did send out all the emails. You should be able to see it if you check your email. Be sure to still download all the resources from day 7. And I appreciate you all. There's 2 other extra feature videos I did not play. One of them is a interview of myself. Another is Mark Passio explaining why he's an abolitionist. And another is George Seckel explaining freedom and spirit and the principles of consciousness. There'll be a lot more talk about a lot of those concepts as well as time moves on, so stay tuned. Thank you guys for hanging out, and I'll see you tomorrow. We have more animations tomorrow, great videos, great interviews. Stay tuned for the Roundtable live stream at the end of all these days. If you haven't already and you guys are new here, anyone new here, endofslavery.org or nita.one/summit, either one, and you can sign up for this huge event with so much great information. Thank you, everyone. Take care. I'm going to raid someone on Twitch for those of you who are my Twitch viewers. Okie dokes. Thank you guys. Peace.